Chapter 284. The undead race was unable to reproduce. After all, those whose bodies were already rotting would not be able to reproduce no matter how hard they tried. So how could they maintain the population of the undead? The answer was simple. They had to transform the dead. There were two ways to transform a necromancer. One was corpse transformation, which was to turn a corpse into a mindless zombie that only listens to orders. The other was awakening, which was to release the seed of awakening and wait for the corpse to awaken and become one of their kind, an undead with self-awareness. The time taken for awakening could be long or short. The shorter the time, the stronger the undead talent. Simon, the necromancer who led the attack on Sora Outpost, took 127 years to awaken as an undead. In a sense, his talent was above average. Now that he had advanced to level 10, he could be called a powerful mage. Among the 6 mages under Baron Balaam, he was also the strongest. Simon, who practiced summoning and puppetry at the same time, easily took down Sora Outpost before noon. The troops he led and controlled included 40 undead, 3 puppets, and over 180 zombies and skeletons. When the battle began, Simon had 3 earth puppets form a ladder. With the help of the undead spells and the soldiers' attacks, they directly broke through the defense of the outpost. As Hanks led most of the troops, the dozens of logisticians who were guarding the outpost had no chance to fight back. They were slaughtered and turned into zombies in the blink of an eye. At this time, Sora Outpost was filled with the stench of blood. The undead soldiers armed with weapons were patrolling the outpost tower. The swaying zombies were eating the mutilated corpses on the ground. In fact, they did not need food. Eating corpses was just their instinct. Wizard Simon was slightly dissatisfied when he saw that the drill ground was filled with the remains of corpses. He turned to the wraith servant beside him and ordered, "Get someone to clean up this place. Sir Baron will arrive here in the evening. I don't want Sir Baron to see anything dirty here." "Yes, sir." After the soldier received the order and left, Simon turned to another attendant and ordered, "Tell the soldiers on the sentry tower to keep an eye on this place. Tell me when Carl comes back. Why does this guy have to spend so much effort to hunt down a few deserters?" Of course, Simon didn't know that his good friend Carl had already been shot in the head by Roddy. At this moment, all the undead soldiers in the sentry post were still in the excitement of winning the battle. When the soldiers who counted the supplies reported the harvest from the warehouse, Simon was elated and full of anticipation for the reward from the Baron. Noon had passed and the sun was covered by dark clouds. It seemed that it was going to snow again. Although this hat is a little ugly, it must be worn in battle. In the woods 7 kilometers away, Roddy was whispering to Akasha, "Take out those scrolls when you need to use them. Don't hesitate. It doesn't matter if IKA and Mason see them. Don't worry about the influence of the necromancy. I will give them a reasonable explanation." The latter words were naturally whispered because the 2 priests were closing their eyes in the distance at this time. Roddy still wanted to say something, but when he turned his head, he found that Akasha's face was a little close to his own. He immediately stepped back a little awkwardly. That, I know, I will listen to you." Since the confession incident, Akasha's attitude toward Roddy had changed a lot. Now she was no longer afraid to speak as before. Instead, she became unusually calm and well-behaved. It was just that Roddy's action of stepping back just now still made her eyes flash a trace of imperceptible disappointment. He is still restraining himself after all, but he is obviously concerned about me, which shows that he still cares about me very much. Akasha was not in a hurry. She was even mentally prepared for a protracted war. She thought about it, raised her hand and put on the white priest hat that she didn't wear because it was too troublesome before. Then, she deliberately tied the belt a little askew, lowered her eyes and asked, "Is this okay?" It's a little askew here." Roddy pointed. Seeing Akasha's puzzled face, he had to take a step closer and reach out to help her tie the belt again. At such a distance, Roddy's nose was filled with the faint fragrance of Akasha's body. This smell seemed to have a strange power, soft and intoxicating. Ahem, what am I thinking? Now that the team is resting and ready to enter the battlefield again, I should consider how to reduce the possible losses of the team, Roddy. While his mind was thinking randomly, Akasha suddenly called his name. He tied the belt, lowered his arm, looked down, and looked into Akasha's eyes. Such a choice is very difficult. Akasha looked at Roddy, her tone solemn and with a little admiration, choosing to save them. Your pressure must be unimaginable. But no matter what happens next, I will support you in doing so. I think you are doing the right thing, and I am proud to follow you. She took a deep breath, as if saying these words exhausted all her strength. She lowered her gaze. I will go over there to see the wounded. After saying that, she covered her chest and ran away, not knowing that her cheeks were already flushed. Roddy still stood there, looking at her back in a daze. Then, his expression softened a lot. Although he only said a few words, the pressure in his heart would be relieved a lot if he could be understood and recognized. For him, this might be more comforting than a zero-death record. Her hat doesn't look good. Natha appeared silently beside him and even complained about Akasha. This surprised Roddy, but he said very seriously, "You have to wear it well whether the equipment is ugly or not. You too, although that leather hat is ugly, it is made of the skin of a fire-thorn iguana. You have to wear it on the battlefield." Natha turned her head away, seemingly very reluctant. Roddy's own beast controller headband design was passable, but Natha's lower-level leather helmet was not beautiful enough. This might be the only flaw of the entire set of leather armor. However, Roddy was a pragmatic person. If he could increase his attributes by 2 points, he would never care how ugly the equipment was. There is no room for negotiation. Put it on now. The team will set off soon. With a cold response, Natha reached out to put on the leather helmet. Roddy glanced at it and helplessly pointed at her chin. "It's crooked there. Move it this way." "Help me." "Ah." Roddy even suspected that he had heard wrongly. He turned his head to look at Natha, only to find that she was still looking at him expressionlessly. "Fasten it yourself. I still have things to do." Roddy rejected without hesitation. He even felt that it was unreasonable. Natha had always been so stubborn and independent that it made people's hair stand on end. She had never asked anyone for help, but what was wrong with her today? He obviously did not notice the slight resentment in Natha's eyes. Otherwise, Roddy would definitely pinch his thigh to make sure that he was not hallucinating. The soldiers in the camp were doing their best to recover their strength. They knew that this rest was only temporary. According to the plan, the team would set off for Sora's outpost in 2 hours. Throw away everything that needs to be unloaded. Get everything ready as soon as possible. The squires had already chopped down a lot of wood to make a simple climbing ladder. Hanks and Sodeler were discussing the possibility of attacking from different angles. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew that their current situation was not good. And Roddy knew that he was racing against time. Frost Baron Bellorm was a stage boss of an epic-ranked mission. Roddy knew that he might not be able to fight against him, so he had to take over the outpost before Bellorm arrived. This was a matter of time. If he was 1 step late, then the Sora's outpost that was guarded by Bellorm would not be taken down by his soldiers. At the same time, behind a low slope 6 kilometers away from Sora's outpost, Zoro, who was wrapped in bandages, was deep in thought. The blessing of witchcraft allowed him to display shocking combat strength. He led his team to break through all the front lines and almost succeeded in his plan, but he did not expect it to be ruined by the undead. So many soldiers died, so much blood was shed, but in the end they did not gain anything. This feeling of grievance lingered in the hearts of all the orcs, and they had nowhere to vent their anger. Zoro knew that he could not leave. If he could not snatch food from Sora's outpost, how could he be willing to go back? Was he going to go back and watch his soldiers starve to death? Fortunately, more than half of Zoro's soldiers were still alive. Out of the 47 wolf riders, 30 could still fight, and out of the 50-foot soldiers, 34 could still be used. After being healed by witchcraft, they had recovered 80% to 90% of their combat strength, and could now launch an effective attack on the outpost. But it was only one attack. "I've waited for 3 months, I can't wait any longer." Zoro slowly got up. He knew that he was now standing on the edge of a cliff. Whether he would cross the chasm or fall into the abyss, it all depended on the next battle. He looked up at the gloomy sky and muttered to himself, "If there is no food to eat, I'm afraid that before the next snow comes, we will be completely finished." Witch Doctor, an orc, limped to Zoro's side and struggled to lift the battle-axe that had several dents on it. There were traces of grinding on the blade, and the dried blood seemed to have seeped into the metal. No matter how hard he tried, he could not get rid of it. "Pass down my order. Rest now, we will attack Sora's outpost before dark. This time we will not retreat." Zoro closed his eyes. His body was covered in blood and mud, but he did not bother to wipe it off. No matter how much he cared about appearances and habits, in the face of the pressure of survival, he had to admit a fact. Chapter 285. In the afternoon, snowflakes began to fall from the cloudy sky. The cold wind blew, and the bone-chilling cold became more and more unbearable. The team of the Holy Assembly continued to walk in the wind and snow. They had already left Sora's outpost and continued to move southwest. At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they finally arrived at the edge of the Moke Forest where Elson was located. According to the information from the investigation, the Elson ruins were in this forest. Most of the area under the Gondola Mountains was a rocky wilderness. Regardless of whether it was winter or summer, there were no plants. However, the Moke Forest abruptly occupied a corner of this area. It was quite conspicuous. According to the border marking of the Kingdom of Karen, this area was considered to be out of the kingdom's territory and could be called a land without an owner. Camilla was still exploring the way in front of the team. However, as the team continued to approach Elson, Captain Speck's face became more and more serious. The crystal disc in his hand that was used to determine the energy of the boundary seemed to have malfunctioned. The howling cold wind was blocked by the trees. At this time, there were only scattered snowflakes falling. Captain Speck, who stopped walking, lowered his head and chanted a spell. His brows were tightly knitted, and no one knew what he was thinking. The other members of the Holy Assembly were chatting casually. They were originally hidden in different areas and were not familiar with each other. However, along the way they had exchanged names and formed their own circles and groups. Obviously, they had a tacit understanding to encourage Camilla. Camilla, who was silently leaning against the tree, was extremely tired. Because she had been walking in the front for the past few days, her physical strength could not keep up with the consumption. Her magic was often on the verge of exhaustion. She urgently needed enough time to recover her body, but, "Camilla, continue forward. We will go northwest," Captain Speck ordered. Captain Speck's order came. Camilla slightly tightened her cloak and sighed helplessly. She was about to get up and lead the way when she suddenly stopped in her tracks. She looked ahead with a puzzled expression and then turned back to look at her companions behind her. As if she was not sure about something, she asked hesitantly, "Did someone just say something?" This question made everyone a little speechless. They must have talked in low voices. Captain Speck was even chanting a spell in a low voice. Camilla really did not know what she was trying to say. "What I mean is, someone was behind me just now, that's not right." For a moment, Camilla did not know how to express herself. She had clearly heard a faint voice say something behind her, but when she turned around, she found that the nearest high elf descendant was 5 or 6 feet away. Don't look for these strange reasons. Keep moving forward. Speck only thought that Camilla was looking for a reason to rest, and his cold words made Camilla feel disgusted. But seeing that everyone was looking at her with that strange gaze, Camilla could not say anything in the end. She could only give up on the idea of asking questions and continue walking forward with a heart full of doubt. At this time, they were less than half a day away from Elson. The wind and snow continued to blow. Above the gloomy sky, the blood crows that had circled for a few rounds were now ascending higher and flying into the distance. Carrying the ice thorn on his back, Roddy sorted out the quiver for the last time. After confirming that the 30 explosive arrows in the quiver were all adjusted, he began to fasten the buckles of his leather armor one by one. The Curse Series scroll was inserted into the groove on his belt, the dagger was stuffed into the leather sheath on the side of his boots, and the Eye of Omens necklace was stuffed into his clothes. After tightening the corks of the 4 bottles of potions, Roddy thought for a moment, picked up the still hibernating Nokia, and stuffed it into the pocket at the back of his waist. After a series of movements, he held the black iron rod in his hand, turned around and whispered, "The snow is getting heavier and heavier. Take advantage of the low visibility and move as soon as possible." Understood. Sodeler turned around and waved his hand. "Full speed ahead, go." His orders were quickly communicated to the whole troop, and the horses began to move forward, while the pack horses, which drew the sledges, followed the procession. All the stores were abandoned, the squires mounted on the horses or sledges that were in reserve, and the whole troop began to move with great speed over the snowy road. Because of the snowstorm, the visibility of the environment was extremely low. The increasingly cold wind made it difficult for people to even open their eyes. The knights in cold armor soon felt their bodies stiffen. Looking at these soldiers, Roddy felt an unprecedented anxiety in his heart. Storming a fortress was different from the cavalry's mobile battle. To put it simply, it was to use human lives to pile up the result. Roddy was very clear that after this battle, his soldiers would inevitably suffer unimaginable losses. He reminded Akasha, Natha, Sodeler, and all the soldiers he saw to be prepared for the battle in order to give everyone a chance of survival on the battlefield. But the reality was always cruel. The undead that relied on the defense of the city wall was far from a pushover. Correct the direction. Remember to maintain speed. Sodeler's shout came from the front. This place was not far from Sora's outpost. Under the conditions of the wilderness, the undead with the watchtower would definitely be able to find them easily. But under the cover of the snowstorm, Roddy only hoped that when he arrived, the undead would be caught unprepared due to the low visibility. But as soon as this thought appeared, it was quickly extinguished. Just when the team was more than 1,000 meters away from Sora's outpost, the clear and audible alarm in the distance finally made Roddy lose his last bit of hope. No one slowed down. They continued to advance in silence. Roddy raised his head, but because of the heavy snow, he could only vaguely see the figures on the city wall. He frowned and thought of a countermeasure. But Hank suddenly approached him and said, "Let us be the first vanguard. Only I know the flaws of the city wall the best. Let your men learn from the back. That way, the probability of success will be higher. Let me decide the siege plan." Roddy didn't respond directly. Everyone knew that the first few batches of vanguard were basically throwing their lives away. Hanks's decision was probably to atone for his mistakes. "I only have one request. Don't hesitate when I want you to go." "No problem," Hanks replied loudly to Roddy's words. Then, he spurred his horse forward and galloped forward full of fighting spirit. In front of him, the silhouette of Sora's outpost became increasingly clear in the snowstorm. Were the undead already prepared to defend themselves? Were the stones and logs placed on the city walls ready to be smashed down? Images of soldiers dying tragically flashed in Roddy's mind, and he became increasingly nervous. But when the team entered the 300-meter range, the alarm in the outpost rang again. What does this mean? Roddy hesitated for a moment, but he didn't change his plan. Instead, he ordered the team to speed up again. War horses weren't needed in a siege. It wouldn't be a problem even if the horse ran to its death. But when the team was 100 meters away from Sora's outpost, the scene of a large group of armed undead waiting on the city wall didn't appear. Roddy saw the undead archers on the outpost desperately shooting downwards, and a figure in a mage's robe was waving his staff continuously. Their attention seemed to be on the other side of the outpost, and they didn't seem to notice him at all. Just as Sodalar ran over to ask Roddy what to do, an earth-shattering roar suddenly sounded. The cavalrymen and squires turned to look at the outpost, only to see one of the 4 small outpost towers shattering and slowly falling inwards. The undead on the tower fell, and screams sounded incessantly. At this moment, no matter how stupid they were, they understood that the undead occupying the outpost were obviously being attacked by another force. Due to the angle, Roddy could only see the solid wooden city walls on the east and south sides of the outpost. It was obvious that the unknown helper attacked the outpost from the west and north. As a result, the city walls on this side were almost unguarded and defenseless. Who would attack this kind of remote border sentry post? Roddy's mind spun, and he immediately locked onto the answer. Chapter 286. As the former commander of Sora's outpost, Hanks was familiar with the structure of this fortress. Under his guidance, Roddy did not even need to probe to find the most vulnerable spot on the southern wall. At this time, the soldiers had already lifted the previously treated tree trunks off the sleds and began to assemble simple wooden ladders. Move to the sides after you get on the wall. Attack a sentry tower and secure the advantage on the wall. First team, get ready to move out. Sodalar tightened the buckle of the shield on his left arm and loudly arranged the order of attack for the soldiers. Within a few minutes, 3 simple wooden ladders, each 8 meters long, had been assembled. Squads of soldiers lined up and immediately began to charge towards the city walls. Full buff. Roddy did not intend to sit in the center of the fortress. Instead, he led a group of elites to stand at the front line, ready to attack together. After his order was issued, the 3 priests immediately began to cast all kinds of buffs. Roddy, Sodalar, Ruger, Carter, Natha, Hanks, and 6 of the strongest knights in the cavalry received the buffs of strength, agility, defense, movement speed, and attack strength. Then, they drank the Stoneskin potion. After switching to the devout title, Roddy, whose strength had increased by 30%, opened the last Witcher. Looking at the attributes that had almost doubled, he waved his hand and signaled the squad of 15 to advance. At the same time, the first group of 60 people had already rushed to the wall with 3 simple wooden ladders. The holy shield flickered as it was activated. The defending undead soldiers began to defend with arrows, but for some reason there were only a dozen or so undead defending the southern wall. There was no storm of attacks like they had imagined. Facing such a weak counterattack, the first group of soldiers successfully set up 3 ladders on the wall under the protection of the shields and holy shield. Until now, only 3 people were injured by arrows. This number of casualties was far below Roddy's expectations. When he led the 3rd and 4th team forward, the undead were desperately rushing to the ladders, trying to overthrow them. Natha, cover fire. As Natha and Roddy both used explosive arrows, the undead near the ladder were all killed. Before more undead could arrive, the first soldier had already rushed up the city wall. The frontmost soldier fearlessly faced the undead charging at him. He raised his shield and swung his sword. He calmly defeated 2 skeletons. Then, he pulled his comrade behind him up. Charge, 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 charge! The first batch of soldiers that jumped up from the ladder were all scouts that Roddy had personally trained in Norland Village. The cowardly and incompetent youths of the past had been reborn. They wore excellent armor and held excellent short swords from the ducal palace. Their combat strength was abnormally strong. Although their average level was level 10, they were actually equivalent to an elite of the same level. The skeletons and zombies, which were around level 7, were no match for them at all. As the 20 members of the first party climbed up the wall and charged forward, all the undead in the corridor of the wall were slashed to the ground in an instant. The siege was so smooth that Zottler thought he was hallucinating. But when he saw the soldiers on the wall brandishing their swords in a frenzy, he couldn't help but believe that the defense of this wall was really useless. 3 ladders were continuously sending soldiers up the wall. Because of the powerful soldiers joining in, the corridor was instantly filled with broken limbs and wreckage. At this moment, the value of the soldiers' long-term training could be seen. Facing the arrows from the sentry tower, the scouts raised their shields and bent their waists as they advanced rapidly, carrying out combat orders efficiently. As they advanced, they didn't stop or ask questions. With their equipment and level advantage, they quickly crushed all the enemies on the south wall. Then, they split into 2 teams and began to attack the sentry tower. They had a clear division of labor and great teamwork. All teams, follow me and charge. Clear the walls and archers, take the high ground and advance. Zottler ordered loudly. Then, he stepped on the ladders with his shield in hand and began to climb. Behind him were Hanks, Ruger, and Carter. Roddy and Natha were in the middle with their bows. Behind them were 3 priests and 6 knights. These 15 people were the highest level and most powerful elites in the current team. According to past experience, such people would lead a team to attack alone. But this time, Roddy did the opposite. He deliberately gathered the 15 people into a unique team and even braved the arrows to become the 3rd team to charge up the wall. No one knew why Roddy made such an arrangement, but the only thing they understood was that this team was definitely the soul of the entire army. Continue forward. Forward. Roddy's team rushed up the wall and then led the troops at the back to the center of the sentry tower. From this moment on, this team became the vanguard of the entire army. And it was also at this time that Roddy finally understood the reason for the weak defense of the undead. This is the King of 10,000 Axes. At the south wall, Roddy could clearly see the terrifying scene on the north wall. The solid wood wall actually had a crack in the middle that was as wide as 2 people. It seemed like it was directly broken by brute force. And that godlike figure, Roddy had only seen it in videos before. The number of undead guarding the sentry tower was not small at all. Including the summoned skeletons and the newly transformed zombies, there were at least 300 of them. But in front of the crazy orcs that rushed into the sentry tower, they were simply a flock of sheep. Zottler stood next to a collapsed sentry tower. The smoke and snow could not hide his huge figure. With the help of the most powerful witchcraft and herbs, the skeletons and zombies were no longer an obstacle. Dong, dong, dong. He led the team forward with an oppressive pace. The surrounding orcs roared and repelled wave after wave of undead. When a zombie rushed up, he casually swung his axe, and a large number of broken limbs flew out. He raised his leg and kicked fiercely. 3 or 4 skeletons in a straight line in front of him were scattered into pieces with a crash. Necromancer Simon stood in front of the sentry tower in the center of the camp with a serious face. He waved a pitch-black magic staff in his hand and threw out bone prison and bone spears, one after another. For an ordinary person, such a short period of time would mean death, but Sauron calmly stretched out his hand and broke the bone prison into pieces. Then he raised his giant axe and slashed away the bone spears as if they were light. He was not injured at all, but then he did not have the intention to fight with Simon. Instead, he led a group of orcs to attack the warehouse on the west side of the sentry tower. Obviously, Zottler did not want to occupy this place at all. His main purpose was to plunder food. Wizard Simon was not stupid. He almost immediately saw the intention of the group of orcs. But the more he saw it, the more he wanted to vomit blood. If you want to eat, I will give you. Do you really have to smash the city wall and destroy the sentry tower to rob it? If you do this, how am I going to explain to the Baron? But this was not what worried him the most. What gave Simon a headache was the sudden appearance of a group of human soldiers behind him. After all, the orcs were only here to rob the warehouse, but this group of humans was definitely here to rob the sentry tower. Surround them. Simon gave a death order. At the same time, there were also 2 earth puppets and 1 iron puppet. This suddenly increased the pressure faced by Roddy and the others. As a powerful wizard, he finally began to use all his strength to deal with the humans in front of him. Your courage is commendable. He never believed that the humans had any combat power. In fact, he did not even intend to take them seriously. The small team that came down from the city wall had already begun to charge forward. Zodeler, who was fully equipped with MT equipment, was almost invulnerable. Hanks, who was following beside him, had a base level of 16. Including Ruger and Carter, who were level 13, the 4 people leading the way were not weak. Roddy and Natha were in the middle of the damage output. The 3 priests behind them maintained the healing and shields. 6 cavalrymen brought up the rear to protect them. The whole team was like a tank. At this time, they were moving at an astonishing speed in Simon's direction. In just half a minute, they were within 30 meters of Simon. Bang! The blocking skeleton was sent flying. Roddy and Natha aimed their arrows at Simon at the same time. But after the arrows were shot, Simon used a strengthened bone shield spell to firmly block them. He even took the opportunity to counterattack with 2 bone spear spells. Roddy frowned but ordered, "Continue forward." But powerful mages were not just words. 2 earth puppets, 1 iron puppet, and dozens of skeletons quickly outflanked them. The advance of this small team finally slowed down and even came to a halt. Simon's lips curled into a cold smile. Then, he began to cast the powerful spell, Death Coil. As the spell with the highest damage at the current level, Simon only needed 4.5 seconds to cast it. But he did not expect that he had unknowingly fallen into the trap that Roddy had created. Just as Simon was about to cast Death Coil, Roddy immediately shouted to the team, "Advance, break the formation!" Boom! The holy light spell, that had been brewing for a long time, was instantly unleashed. While the undead were collectively stunned. Zodeler and the others had already raised their shields. With a roar, they pushed the enemies in front of them back 3 to 4 meters. Be it the puppets or skeletons, all the enemies in front of Roddy were knocked away with their bodies. Thus, a path appeared in front of Roddy. It was very difficult to kill such a powerful necromancer in the open. But Roddy did not believe in heresy, so he chose to ambush, or in other words, the most powerful close combat kill. Gallop and leap were activated. In a flash, Roddy rushed out. With his shockingly high dexterity attribute, his figure was completely like black lightning. In almost the blink of an eye, he closed the distance between him and Simon. Chapter 287. Time stood still at this moment. Simon chanted an incantation and pointed his wand forward. He was not multitasking, but he was releasing the level 2 bone shield stored inside his wand. Countless grayish-white elements were condensing in front of him, instantly turning into a huge shield that was floating in the air. His eyes were filled with ridicule, as if he could already see the scene of Roddy being shredded into pieces by the death coil. Roddy, who was struggling to move forward, knocked away the last skeleton in front of him, and then raised the black staff in his hand. But at this time, there was still a distance of more than 4 meters between Roddy and Simon, and with the shield blocking, anyone could guess that his full blow would be useless against Simon. "Roddy!" Akasha cried out in alarm, but it was too late to release the holy shield. Natha pursed her lips and raised her longbow, but found that she could not aim at Simon while surrounded by enemies. Sodeler and the others at this time were already exhausted, surrounded by countless skeletons, zombies and puppets, and there were even deep wounds on their bodies. It seemed that all their efforts were in vain. But in the face of the threat of death coil, Roddy still waved the weapon in his hand forward without changing his expression. Roddy believed in his own strength, and even more in the weapon in his hand, because it was the only epic close combat weapon in the Ducal Palace that he could use. Previously, when Sodeler and Roddy proposed to learn from each other, the reason why Roddy refused to use this weapon was because using it was actually cheating. The black staff in his hand was not a nameless weapon. On the contrary, it actually had a terrifying name. Cranium Crusher Epic Chain Hammer single-hand advanced to level 4458. 629 damage plus 129 strength use. Can be changed into the form of a chain, attack range increased by 1 meter, attack speed decreased by 10%, damage increased by 10% use. Can be changed into the form of a chain hammer, attack range increased by 2 meters, attack speed decreased by 25%, damage increased by 25%. It is a perfect work of art. Great Enchanter Koenigsegg. Whether it was a work of art or not, Roddy was not interested to know. But he was very clear that although a weapon like the chain hammer was not as handsome as a long sword, its power was far greater than what ordinary people could imagine. What was more frightening was that the angle of its attack was not as predictable as that of a sword. Buzz, the form of the chain hammer changed extremely quickly. The moment the iron rod was raised, flashing chains and an octagonal hammer head condensed from ice-blue elements instantly appeared. Ordinary people would not be able to react in time to such a change. Roddy was fully buffed with more than 500 points of strength to drive the chain hammer forward. With an attack range of 2 meters, his swift and unexpected attack hit Simon without any mishap. The bone shield was originally floating in front of Simon. A normal sword would not be able to break through it, but facing the chain hammer, Simon was completely unable to react in time to block it. He raised his staff blankly, wanting to block it with the shield, but found that the hammer head drew a strange arc in the air, directly passing through the bone shield's blocking range, and then became bigger and bigger in his field of vision. The hammer head formed by the ice element was dark blue in color, and its density was not inferior to that of refined iron. All the kinetic energy released by Roddy's arm was transferred to the hammer head at this moment. So when it came into contact with Simon's head, everyone heard the crisp sound of bones breaking. Crack! After Simon's head was hit by the hammerhead, the bridge of his nose, brow bone, and cheekbone instantly shattered. The huge kinetic energy continued to be transferred, and with a "pu" sound, the entire cranial cavity ruptured. Grayish-white brain juice mixed with blood splattered out. His body was still in the original spellcasting position, but the death coil burst out a cloud of black smoke due to the backlash, whistling around his body, and then in an instant, completely tearing him apart. From start to finish, Roddy had only used one hammer strike to directly pass through the shield and kill Simon. In the next moment, all the zombies and skeletons under Simon's control in the sentry post instantly lost their will to fight. They stood there in a daze. Surrounded, Sodeler and the others could barely hold on, but after Simon died, all the pressure instantly disappeared. Only the earth golems and iron golems still had their instincts to fight, but just as the strongest iron golem was about to pounce on Roddy, it was smashed in the head by the flying chain hammer dong. The sound of the chain hammer striking against metal was like the ringing of a bell. Heavy weapons were far more effective against metal than scimitars and longsword. With just one strike, the iron golem's completely deformed head drooped down to its chest. Roddy turned around and swung the third time, smashing the upper body of a nearby earth golem with a crash. Advance! Kill all the undead! With the chain hammer in hand, Roddy's attitude of 1 against 100 instantly boosted the morale of the entire army, and the elite team he led began a one-sided massacre. Under the cover of the 2 sentry towers and the 2 sides of the city wall, Roddy's army had already gained a firm foothold in the sentry post. But just as the army continued to advance, Sodaler, who was holding up his shield, asked, "What about those orcs?" This was the question that everyone in the army wanted to ask. The orcs had definitely helped greatly for this sudden attack to be so easy. Although the enemy of my enemy is my friend, everyone knew that they would never be friends with the orcs. Hanks and the others had almost all their comrades killed by these orcs in the morning, and Roddy had even slaughtered the entire Sauron tribe a few months ago. How could such a deep hatred be erased by such a coincidence? Roddy really wanted to wave his hand and say, "Kill all the orcs," but seeing Sauron's face that was much younger than he remembered, he frowned and thought for a few seconds. Finally, he replied, "Surround 3 of them and drive them out." Are they fighting for supplies?" Sodaler swung his sword and cut off the head of a zombie. He frowned and asked, "Aren't we going to stop them?" Roddy shook his head, indicating that he would carry out the order. Sodaler did not continue to ask anything. He knew that Roddy must have his own reasons, so he immediately raised his shield and rushed towards the hundreds of zombies that only had their instincts left. The chaotic battle inside the sentry post seemed to be coming to an end. The orcs were looting in the warehouse on the other side of the camp. The wolf riders each carried some food in their hands and had already begun to retreat from the sentry post. The orc infantry, under Sauron's command, blocked the charging undead outside the warehouse, and the King of Thousand Axes stood in front of everyone with a tomahawk in hand, blocking all threats for his subordinates behind him like a door god. In this way, the orcs and the advancing human troops actually formed a situation of well water not interfering with river water in a short period of time. The undead caught in the middle could be said to be extremely unlucky. Originally, this team had the undead knights led by Wizard Carl as the main force, but they did not expect Carl's team to be annihilated. Now, the most powerful wizard Simon was even smashed in the head in front of everyone. At this time, the troops that had lost control and the remaining undead had completely lost their combat strength. They were completely reduced to straws that could be harvested. Roddy put away his chain hammer and looked at Sauron, who was standing in the distance. The King of Thousand Axes also noticed this young human with amazing combat strength. But just as the two of them looked at each other through the heavy snow, Sauron's expression suddenly became fierce. Sodaler was wearing a full-face helmet, but Roddy's face was exposed because of the leather headband. Sauron would never forget him, because in August, he had personally chased after this human under teacher Soroda's command. He clearly remembered that his throwing net was blocked by this guy in front of him with an arrow. In the end, he could not complete the encirclement and annihilation mission, and later, Sauron thought that Soroda's death must be directly related to this human in front of him. The most important goal in Sauron's heart was to avenge Soroda. At this time, he suddenly saw his real enemy, and his heart was filled with violent hatred involuntarily. But Sauron, who was holding the battle axe tightly, did not attack immediately. He spent a lot of effort, but finally, he slowly moved his eyes away. There were only about 40 of his soldiers left. Because of the continuous fighting, the entire team had long reached the limit of their physical strength. If it was not for the support of witchcraft, perhaps they would not even have the strength to continue fighting. And behind Roddy, there were nearly 200 fully armed humans approaching menacingly. With just a few glances, Sauron knew that this group of humans was definitely not some weaklings. Their strength might even be more ferocious than his own men. If he rushed forward like this, not only would he not be able to take revenge, but it was very likely that he would completely lose his remaining trump card. Sauron would never do such a stupid thing. Leave here. The wolf cavalry was not a carriage. Each person could barely take something and leave. In a hurry, Sauron could not care about anything else. He could only wave his axe and give the order to evacuate. As long as he could leave here safely, he still had a chance to find trouble with this sentry post. It was never too late to take revenge. This was what his teacher had taught him. The undead were slaughtered and completely lost their fighting spirit. Roddy successfully seized control of the sentry post. The orcs got the food they wanted and retreated without any hindrance, without losing many people. The two sides, who might have been mortal enemies, tacitly took what they needed because of mutual fear. From beginning to end, there was no conflict. It seemed that this battle was about to come to an end. However, just as Sauron was about to lead the troops to leave through the gap in the city wall, the flying snow was suddenly filled with a biting cold aura. A cold current came from under his feet, causing him to stop in alarm. The air seemed to have dropped by 10 degrees. The cracks in the solid wood wall in front of him began to show large patches of white frost. The extremely cold aura continued to spread around, and the deformed wood due to the change in temperature made a crunching sound with a flash of cold light. The sound of wood cracking rang out. Boom! A 4-meter-wide gap appeared in the crack in the wall. Debris and snowflakes slowly fell from the sky. A tall figure riding a skeletal warhorse slowly stepped into everyone's sight. Balaam held a long sword in his hand and entered Sora's sentry post alone. His expression was sinister and his tone was cold. Chapter 288. Ever since he left the Tasman Kingdom, all of Balaam's plans had been exceptionally smooth. He had used the avalanche to wipe out Roddy's troops, and used the orcs to wipe out the human defenders. Such an ingenious move was definitely a great military achievement. Balaam had even written 2 long letters to King Augustine just to show off in front of the old fellows in the noble parliament. However, just as he proudly led his men towards Sora's outpost, he did not expect that the cooked duck would really fly away. The toppled tower, the roaring orcs, and the humans climbing up the tower. Balaam's mood instantly soured when he saw this scene. The furious Balaam did not have time to wait for his followers. Extremely confident in his strength, he immediately spurred his horse forward and arrived in front of Sora's outpost alone, just in time to block the orcs who were trying to escape. Looking at the humans who had already taken down the tower and the orcs who were slaughtering the undead as if they were chickens, Balaam could not help but recall the boastful letter he had written to King Augustine. In the letter, he had easily taken down the outpost, but in the blink of an eye, it had been reduced to such a state. All of this made him feel as if he had been slapped in the face. Since you're all here, then don't leave. At this moment, Balaam was wearing a set of gorgeous dark silver heavy armor. In comparison, Zordler's excellent armor was like a street item. The long sword in his hand was emitting a blue radiance, and the runic patterns were flashing like a tide. Even though the sky was filled with snow, the blade of the sword was still floating with white mist due to the low temperature. Facing the dozens of orcs who were about to charge at him, Balaam's eyes narrowed. He raised the reins, and the skeletal warhorse moved in an instant, charging at all the orcs by himself. Such a scene looked like they were overestimating themselves, but Rhodey and Sauron gripped their weapons tightly at the same time as if they were facing a formidable enemy. The stronger they were, the more they could feel how terrifying Balaam was. Especially when he lifted his sword, the huge sense of oppression was suffocating. Bang! With a wave of his longsword, the first beastman to face Balaam was sent flying, followed by the second, the third. The beastmen knew that there was no way out, and they all rushed forward with their weapons in hand, ready to stop this guy even by a single step. However, they did not expect that after 30 to 40 meters of charging, Balaam was unharmed, and his speed even increased. While the 8 beastmen in front of him were all killed with a single slash, there was no earth-shattering explosion or fire. Balaam's silent display of strength was so low-key that the remaining beastmen did not realize how terrifying he was. But just as Balaam was about to start a new round of slaughter, Sauron roared and joined the battle. Get out of the way! He had no choice but to attack, because if this continued, his subordinates would probably all be killed. Zorro's gaze swept over Roddy, and a little hesitation flashed in his heart, but then he immediately made up his mind. He silently chanted a spell and quickly released the spell Ancestral Soul. Amidst the painful wails, Sauron's body quickly doubled in size. His steel-like muscles swelled up, and his shirt was completely torn apart. When he stepped forward, his dull footsteps were like those of an ancient beast. This spell was the talent of the Beastman Witch Doctor, which could double or triple the strength of an individual for 10 minutes, but the side effect was that all attributes would be reduced by 80% for 24 hours, and they would have to endure inhuman pain. Sauron had never used this trump card in previous battles, but now that he was facing Balorm, he had to prepare for the worst. At the same time, Roddy was giving orders in a low voice. Natha, go to the central sentry tower and cover the shooting. Sodalar, go with me with a shield. If you can't hold them off, retreat. Akasha, the three of you find a place to cover and replenish our shields at any time. Do not expose yourselves to the enemy. Ruger, Carter, lead a team to occupy all the high ground and provide long-range support, but do not get close to the Beastman and that guy. Hanks, are there any heavy weapons here? There are 2 heavy crossbows in the equipment warehouse, but I'm afraid that they will be damaged by the low temperature. I'll bring some people to assemble them immediately. Hanks immediately understood Roddy's intention, and quickly ran over with his men. The heavy crossbow was not the kind of crossbow that injured Magda. To put it bluntly, it was just a little more powerful than a normal crossbow. Roddy did not have much hope for it, because he knew that it was far from enough to deal with Balorm. His opponent was the big boss of the first stage of the Judgment of the Bone Throne. His elite team could deal with Simon, but against a powerful existence like Balorm, it would really be suicide if they charged forward. Piling on lives? If it was someone else, they might have hardened their heart and used this method to deal with Balorm, but Roddy knew how powerful the Frost Baron was. This guy's advanced class was Death Knight, and he majored in the Frost element. And Roddy knew that all Death Knights who majored in the Frost element would have a minor in the Transformation element. In other words, all the creatures that Balorm killed would be converted into his army. Roddy turned his gaze to the beastmen that were just sent flying. As expected, the corpses that were originally on the ground were now slowly standing up with huge wounds on their bodies and pouncing on their former comrades. And at this moment, Zorro's battle axe finally collided with Balorm's longsword. Bang! A violent shockwave suddenly exploded, and the snowflakes within 20 meters were instantly blown away. Zorro's giant battle axe slammed into the guard tower 7 or 8 meters away, and with a boom, the scout that was fighting for control of the tower was almost shaken off. Balorm, on the other hand, was sent flying from the skeletal warhorse with a face full of shock. The huge recoil almost caused the long sword in his hand to drop. When he landed on the ground, he had already adjusted his body. Although he did not fall, this result was still far beyond his expectations. Gripping the hilt of his sword with his ash-gray hand, Balorm was so angry that he laughed. He elegantly took off the cloak hanging on his shoulder and threw it away. His hoarse and gloomy voice carried a bone-chilling coldness in the snow. Very well, very well. It's been many years since someone made me fight like this. Without his warhorse, his words now obviously lacked a bit of arrogance, but revealed an indescribable ruthlessness. The King of Thousand Axes, on the other hand, understood the principle of talking less nonsense in battle. He swung his battle axe and rushed over like a chariot. The single-target bloodlust allowed his huge body to be as agile and full of explosive power as before, and he only needed 5 steps to reach Balorm. He was now nearly half a meter taller than the Frost Baron, and his shoulders were more than twice as wide. No matter how one looked at it, he had the upper hand. But when the axe fell, Zoro's expression instantly changed. Bang! Belorm, who was wielding his sword with both hands, narrowed his eyes and blocked the heavy battle axe with a standard heavy sword stance. Is that all? Belorm raised his hand to break the momentum, and the battle axe was instantly deflected. Instead of retreating, Belorm advanced with 3 consecutive strikes and 2 legs as fast as lightning, immediately forcing Zoro to retreat. Each of his attacks followed the most rigorous noble swordsmanship, and even the way he lifted his legs to attack had a hint of elegance. But elegance could not be eaten. What was truly powerful was the powerful strength and explosive power that he constantly released. Even though his thighs were clearly not as thick as Zoro's wrists, he still made Zoro unable to fight back. And this was only Belorm who had not used any skills. Damn! Witnessing this scene, Roddy's original plan of rushing forward with Sodalar to engage in close combat with the enemy suddenly disappeared. Even a fierce person like the King of 10,000 Axes was beaten like a child. Should he foolishly rush forward and die? The strength of the enemy was far beyond his imagination. Instinctively, Roddy wanted to retreat, but before he could make any decision, a large number of dark blue icicles flew towards him without warning. Cover! Sodalar roared and immediately raised his shield in front of Roddy. Roddy used this opportunity to lower his head, and instantly heard the pitter-patter-patter sounds of collision. "None of you can escape," Belorm's voice came. It was obvious that he had been staring at Roddy for a long time. However, before Roddy could get up, a short scream instantly made his heart sink to the bottom. Roddy turned his head and found Akasha lying 7 or 8 meters away with a pale face. Drops of blood splashed on the snow-covered ground, unusually conspicuous at this moment. His mind was almost blank. He immediately used the leap skill to jump to the side of Akasha, whose eyes were tightly closed. He reached out and pressed the wound on her abdomen that was penetrated by the icicles, then turned his head and shouted at the priest, "What the F***ck are you waiting for? Heal! Hurry up and heal!" After saying that, he pulled out the bottle of extreme healing potion from his waist, helped her up, and poured it into his mouth. Roddy was a little confused, but his arms were very steady. After the priest cast the healing spell on Akasha, he picked her up by the waist and strode to the side of the bunker before putting her down. Because he was anxious, he kept talking to himself, "Hold on. Don't let anything happen." Akasha's frown made him feel like a knife was twisting in his heart, and an indescribable anger instantly filled his chest. After confirming that Akasha's breathing was stable, he held her hand tightly, turned around, and rushed out. "Damn it! Do you think I'm afraid of a skeleton like you?" His low curse was heard clearly by Akasha. She opened her eyes and looked at the back of Roddy as he left. Her fingers slightly flexed a few times, and her eyes flashed with a strange emotion. The penetrating wound was indeed very painful, but for Akasha, who had suffered countless punishment of whipping, it was not a big deal at all. Roddy was full of anger at this moment. He was still considering whether to escape, but Belorm's words made him realize that he could no longer escape such a battle. The transformed orcs had already stood up and joined the battle. If he did not stop Belorm, his soldiers would also be transformed into these damn undead. "Sodalar, cover for me." He raised his short bow and activated rapid shooting, eagle's eye ring, and focus shooting at the same time. Explosive arrows were shot at Belorm, but in the midst of the explosions, the Frost Baron blocked all his attacks with just one hand. Magda had low defense, so she had to dodge Roddy's arrows. But a heavy armor knight like Belorm was not afraid of any long-range attacks at all when he was prepared. Not only that, but his superb frost skills were also unpredictable. Just as Roddy was about to continue shooting, he grabbed the opportunity to twist Sauron's arm and throw him away. The longsword turned towards Roddy, and even though there was a distance of more than 30 meters between them, Roddy could still feel the sharp and cold killing intent. "Ah!" A coward who only knows how to sneak attack. Chapter 289. Unlike the difference in levels when he fought Magda, what made Roddy feel helpless now was the unavoidable class suppression. The archery that he was so proud of was almost useless against a magical tank-type boss like Balaam, while the Frost Death Knight's control and entanglement skills were best at 1v1 battles. Against an enemy like Balaam, he had to rely on high burst damage to kill him in one wave. If he could not do it, it would be difficult to gain any advantage in a protracted battle. But now, it was difficult for Roddy to even get close to Balaam, let alone burst. Although Zoro could get close to him, he could not do much damage at all. At first, he could rely on his 3 axes to gain a slight advantage, but now he was thrown to the side due to his stamina consumption. Roddy was extremely angry at Akasha's injury, but the whistling Yoi cone of ice forced him to hide behind Zottler. As the metal shield was hit with countless dents, he finally made up his mind and shouted, "Block it. Just one. Charge. It's up to you." At the moment of life and death, Zottler did not hesitate to listen to Roddy's arrangements. He raised his shield and charged forward, while Roddy threw away his bow and followed closely behind. The Frost Baron narrowed his eyes at the two, a hint of mockery in his eyes. He raised his longsword and swung it horizontally. Zottler didn't even think about counterattacking. He used all his strength to block the shield, condensing the battle aura that he hadn't accumulated much yet in front of him, forcibly blocking the sword. Bang! Frost exploded and the shield shattered into pieces. Zottler flew 6 or 7 meters in the air before crashing into a wooden pillar, coughing up blood as he fell to the ground, unable to get up. But he had succeeded in buying a second and a half for Roddy. This second and a half was the only chance for Roddy to get close. Sprint and leap, Turtle Shield, was activated, and Roddy appeared in front of Balaam without dodging. He gripped the handle of his hammer with both hands and smashed it down. In this strike, Roddy did not hold back, nor did he leave any room for retreat. The Cranium Crusher's attack was too stealthy, and Balaam was overconfident. Like Simon, he did not expect Roddy's iron rod to turn into a chain hammer in an instant. So when the sword blocked the hammer's handle, the hammer's head smashed into Balaam's left shoulder. Crack! The metal pauldrons were completely dented from the impact, and the immense force caused Balaam to jerk to the side. However, he was able to stand his ground with his powerful physique. Damn it! Balaam felt humiliated. How could a Frost Baron be hurt by such a trick? This was simply unforgivable. Roddy raised his leg and kicked fiercely. Balaam twisted his body to dodge, and quickly struck out with his sword. The blade knocked the ice hammer away, and the hilt of the sword in his right hand slammed into Roddy's chest. This strike would have shattered any ordinary person's internal organs, but Roddy withstood it with his Turtle Shield. He grunted and did not take a step back. Instead, he continued to swing the chain hammer forward. The weakness of a Death Knight was its lack of agility. The heavily armored Balaam could not dodge at all. He raised his hand to block, but the chain hammer's trajectory was unpredictable, and his arm was smashed by the hammer's head. Kacha. This strike finally took effect. Due to the lack of protection on the elbow joints of the heavy armor, the chain hammer directly broke Balaam's bones. However, this did not affect Balaam at all. Instead, it completely infuriated him. Although his left hand had lost strength, he swung his sword with his right hand, ruthlessly cleaving away Roddy's chain hammer. Then, he kicked Roddy away. Thud! If not for the Turtle Shield reducing the damage, Roddy's ribs would have been broken by the kick. In order to reduce the force, Roddy used all his strength to retreat, but he still flew uncontrollably for 7 or 8 meters before landing. Rolling down the snow, Roddy felt as if his body was falling apart. However, when he struggled to open his eyes, grabbed the handle of the chain hammer and prepared to get up, he suddenly found a blood-red axe blade in front of him. He looked over and saw Sauron, who was half kneeling on the ground with both hands holding the giant axe, staring at him. The eyes that were red from witchcraft revealed extremely complicated emotions, and blood flowed down his forehead. The future king of 10,000 axes was now less than half a meter away from Roddy. His huge body exuded a fierce aura, and his muscles were like steel. However, because he had been repeatedly attacked by Belorm, there were already 3 or 4 huge wounds on his body. Blood flowed, but he did not care. Roddy's breastplate was deformed and dented, and his face was pale. When he stood up unsteadily, his whole body was trembling slightly. Their eyes met, and both of them knew very well that the other was an enemy that they must kill in this lifetime. To Sauron, Roddy had killed his most respected teacher, nearly 400 tribal warriors, women and children, and even provoked the Hammer of Rohar and the Blood Spear tribe to fight to the death, indirectly causing thousands of casualties. There was no reason for him not to take revenge for such a deep blood feud. In Roddy's eyes, this guy in front of him was one of the main culprits that would harm the entire kingdom of Cairn in the future. He led the orc army to flatten 60% of the kingdom of Cairn's territory, killing countless innocent civilians, and even Naif died at the hands of his troops. No matter what, Roddy had at least 10,000 reasons to tear him into pieces. But at this moment both of them gripped their weapons tightly in their hands, and did not make a move. Roddy stood up with the handle of his hammer, and looked up at the 2.5-meter-tall Sauron. Sauron's giant axe was stabbed into the ground, and he panted heavily to relieve the pain in his body. His eyes were also fixed on Roddy. Everyone in the distance had their hearts in their throat. Sauron, whose left arm had been dislocated by Roddy's sword, was struggling to get up. He had also recognized Sauron, and was afraid that the other party would attack Roddy without a word. But at the next moment Roddy and Sauron looked at each other and asked almost the same question at the same time. Hit him first. Roddy spoke in the Orc Sabine language, while Sauron spoke in the fluent Bringan language. As soon as the words left their mouths, the two instantly understood each other's intentions, and nodded in tacit agreement. But Belorm did not give them the chance to continue chatting. The runes on his sword flashed, and a level 2 frost nova suddenly erupted. Roddy and Sauron somersaulted backward, dodging the ring of ice that would have frozen them in place. Belorm was about to continue forward when an arrow struck his back with a crack. Natha, who was on the watchtower, had a cold expression on her face. She fired her longbow without stopping, but Belorm ignored her attacks and continued forward. However, before he could go far, arrows began to fly towards him one after another. The soldiers who had occupied the watchtower and the city walls were now fully executing Roddy's orders. Although their attacks could not even break Belorm's defense, they succeeded in hindering Belorm's advance. In just a few seconds, a golden light flashed on Roddy's body. The priest's holy shield and Akasha's middle-level healing immediately healed his wounds. But Roddy did not continue to fight. Instead, he raised his hand and pointed at the bloodied Sauron a few meters away, and made a healing and buffing gesture. Such an order sounded a little shocking, and even made the two priests look at each other, but Akasha did not hesitate to execute Roddy's order. When the same healing spell fell on Sauron, the orc could not help but show a trace of surprise in his eyes. Perhaps it was because of the amazing healing effect of the divine spell, but more so because of Roddy's courage in making such a decision. So, without saying a word, he directly cast single-target Bloodlust on Roddy. This was perhaps the first time in the history of the continent that an orc and a human were blessed with witchcraft. In almost 3 or 4 seconds, the two instantly recovered their strength, and their combat power also took a step up. The arrows around him were raining down on Belorm. With his left arm broken, his eyes were gloomy. Seeing that Roddy and Sauron were standing on the same side against him, the Frost Baron became even more agitated. He suddenly moved, the sword in his hand pointed at Roddy. Because in his opinion, Roddy's strength was not as good as Sauron's. But he underestimated Roddy's various trump cards. The curse scroll on his belt instantly shot out, and Roddy threw out 3 debuffs as he retreated. They were attack speed, movement speed, and hit rate. While Balaam staggered, Sauron strode forward, roared angrily, and swung his battle axe with unprecedented strength. Boom! Balaam could not exert any strength after his left arm was broken, and his right hand holding the sword to block. He suddenly felt that he had miscalculated, and was forced to take 4 steps back before he could stabilize himself. Sauron, on the other hand, relied on the attribute bonus brought by the 7 buffs, and followed up with another attack. He swung his battle axe fiercely, and even the Frost Baron's sword was dented. "Enough!" Balaam roared. He raised his sword and prepared to cast an ice spell at Sauron. However, before he could recite an incantation, Roddy's flail strangely flew from behind Sauron and smashed his abdomen, interrupting his incantation. Then, the holy shield fell on Roddy and Sauron. Looking at this scene, Balaam felt an unprecedented sense of helplessness. He never thought that with his strength, he would be forced into such a situation by 2 rats. Break! The runic sword let out a cracking sound, and a rune on the sword suddenly shattered, and a frosty blue energy immediately spread. Roddy's expression changed, and he immediately shouted, "Disarm! Stop him!" Although Sauron and Roddy's words were short, the two were extremely experienced in combat. With just a few words, they understood each other's intentions. Roddy swung his flail, wanting to stop Balaam's footsteps, while Sauron thrust his battle axe forward, preparing to block his opponent's sword. Unexpectedly, Balaam was skilled, and immediately changed his stance, dodging the attack of the giant axe. At the same time, his sword chased after the handle of Roddy's hammer like a nimble snake, forcing him to let go of his weapon. The flail fell to the ground, and Balaam immediately kicked the handle of Sauron's axe. Seeing that Roddy's sword was also coming for his finger, Balaam could only let go in a hurry. Thus, the battle axe flew diagonally towards Roddy, and the flail fell at Sauron's feet. Chapter 290. Just as the battle at Sora Outpost reached its climax, the Holy Assembly's team finally arrived at Elson City, once known as the glory of the High Elves. Although they were descendants of the High Elves, most of the books that recorded the events of that year had been destroyed in the long river of time after more than 700 years. However, it was obvious that the Holy Assembly was powerful. Not only could they measure the energy level of the Elson barrier, but they were also prepared to deal with it. Camilla was still standing at the front of the team. Elson City was huge, even more than twice the size of Hollier City. The hemispherical time-stop barrier enveloped the ancient city. The falling snow paused on the surface of the barrier for a moment, and then quietly evaporated. This was also an important basis for Speck and the others to identify the edge of the barrier. Now, what they needed to do was to speed up the process of the barrier breaking. The high-level existence of the Holy Assembly had obviously prepared a lot of powerful tools for Speck. Other than the crystal to measure the strength of the barrier, Speck also carried a disc-shaped stone tablet with countless complicated magic circles. At this time, the captain was inlaying a magic crystal on the stone tablet. After confirming that the magic circle was activated, he looked up and said, "Camilla, go and put this on the edge of the barrier." His expression was calm as if this was the right thing to do. But Camilla, whose face was full of fatigue, frowned deeply. The bullying she had suffered along the way had already filled her heart with anger, but she did not expect that such tolerance would actually lead to such a worsening result. Everyone knew that Elson City was extremely dangerous. The Holy Assembly had always regarded it as a forbidden area, because many people who wanted to explore the mystery had never returned. But now, Speck actually wanted her to touch the barrier? Who could guarantee what the consequences would be? Camilla would never agree to such an obvious scam. She was extremely disappointed. As an arcanist, Camilla had never thought that she would be so indifferently treated as a sacrifice by her teammates. I refuse. Camilla slowly exhaled, staring at Speck's arrogant face, and said firmly, "This is the order of the Holy Assembly." Speck's voice turned cold. The team members behind her also raised their gazes, and looked at Camilla with slight ridicule. The Holy Assembly and you are two different things. You cannot represent the Holy Assembly's decision. Camilla did not intend to waste any more time talking to him. She leaned against the tree trunk beside her and slowly squatted down. She simply closed her eyes and rested. This kind of open defiance naturally made Speck furious. The Holy Congregation's orders were their will, and Camilla's behavior, if taken to the law, was enough to be labeled as apostasy. As the captain, Speck believed that her dignity could not be challenged. She took a step forward and was about to speak when she found that Camilla suddenly stood up. "How dare you? Something's wrong." Camilla's expression suddenly turned extremely ugly. Her left hand pressed against her forehead, as if she was enduring an indescribable pain. Her other hand waved weakly as if she wanted to say something. However, her entire body then fell forward powerlessly. The rest of the team looked at each other in confusion. Camilla had asked some strange questions before, but now she suddenly fainted. What was going on? A coward who only knows how to escape. Speck couldn't help but curse out loud, but before she could finish, a sudden cracking sound made her shut her mouth. Boom! A thunderous sound came from above Elson. When everyone looked up, they could clearly see the edge of the nodules that began to crack from the top. The next moment, the entire ground shook violently. The intensity was so great that Speck and the others were collectively thrown into the air, and then fell hard on the ground. No one had seen such a scene before, but as the elites of the Holy Assembly, all the arcanists at present were extremely skilled in combat. Except for Camilla, who had fainted, they immediately raised their hands and prepared to cast arcane spells to save themselves. However, when they raised their hands, their expressions changed. The elements disappeared. Back at Sora's outpost, at this moment, Roddy, who was holding the battle axe, and Zoro, who was holding the chain hammer, felt their hearts tighten, because they did not manage to disarm Balaam, and instead let him successfully cast a spell. Prepare to be judged. Balaam seemed to have vented his anger, and the broken runes on his long sword had already dissipated the energy. After the successful release of rune cracking, his body was completely enveloped by an icy blue ice element. Without hesitation, Roddy and Zoro attacked again, the battle axe and chain hammer smashing towards Balaam, but this time, Balaam took the initiative to cast a spell with his sword, and an ice shield more than half a meter thick suddenly appeared in front of him. With two crack sounds, a large crack appeared on the shield, but it did not hurt Balaam at all. Balaam moved freely, and with a raise of his hand, he broke the shield and dashed forward, swinging his sword to split the chain hammer in Zoro's hand, and kicked the tall beastman's leg. Smack! The holy shield shattered like glass, and the metal boots made contact with Zoro's thigh. The instant the cold air spread, Zoro's expression immediately changed. He grunted and rolled to the ground, because if he did not do so, he was afraid that his thigh would directly shatter. Rune cracking gave Balaam an absolutely powerful control ability for a short period of time. This skill allowed him to instantly cast all ice spells within 30 seconds, and the price of casting it was a 20% reduction in attack power, and a 10% reduction in all attributes before the runes recovered. This was one of Balaam's strongest trump cards, and he did not intend to use it at all. But because of Roddy and Zoro's cooperation, he had no choice but to stop underestimating them. While Balaam attacked Zoro, Roddy immediately seized the opportunity to come behind him, and the giant axe in his hand slashed out a second time. But Balaam had already expected this, The ice element had already begun to condense into a new shield behind him, and he was ready to turn around and stab. Once his attack pierced through Roddy's body, he would immediately use Ice Blast to blast him into pieces. At this moment, Roddy knew that he had miscalculated. But the battle axe was far heavier than the flail, and under the huge inertia, there was no room for him to change his attack, and he could only smash down with all his might. Balaam's eyes revealed some satisfaction, but in the next moment a soundless wave seemed to suddenly sweep through the entire world, causing something to quietly disintegrate at that moment. Bang! A loud crash rang out, and Balaam took a few steps back in shock. The ice shield quietly disintegrated, unable to stop the axe at all, and Balaam took the full brunt of the blow. But Balaam's armor was too thick and sturdy, and Roddy's full strength strike only dented his back armor, not causing any fatal damage. But this situation immediately made Roddy feel that something was wrong with his body, and he found that his strength had instantly decreased by 30% to 40%. His gaze swept across the status bar, and all the divine buffs had disappeared, leaving only the red icon of Witchcraft. Single target Bloodlust flashing. What's going on? Seeing that the elements around Balaam had completely dissipated, and his sword suddenly dimmed, the experienced Roddy immediately realized a serious problem. Magic was banned here. Balaam, who was trying to cast a spell, obviously knew this fact as well, and his expression instantly became extremely ugly. But before he could stabilize himself, the bare hammer in Zoro's hand whistled past his face. After the hammer's chain and head disappeared, the flail in Zoro's hand also lost its original power, and had completely turned into a black iron rod. But even if it was just a rod, it was still extremely powerful in Zoro's hands. An explosive arrow shot past Balaam's armor and hit the ground, but it did not explode. Obviously, it was also affected by the magic ban. And it seemed that the only thing on the battlefield that was not affected was Witchcraft. At this point, the battle once again took a dramatic turn. After the magic ban effect appeared without warning, Balaam, who was originally prepared to turn the tables, was once again in trouble. Although Zoro was limping, his attacks were still very threatening, and Balaam had no choice but to continuously dodge. And before Roddy could rejoin the battle, the earthquake that came a step too late completely disrupted everything. Boom! The earthquake caused the sentry tower to shake violently, and the soldiers on the walls and the top of the tower were instantly flung down. Zoro lost his balance and fell to the ground, and Balaam realized that this was his only chance to escape, and he actually chose to run. There was no one here who could stop a boss-level undead from leaving. Under the violent earthquake, Balaam no longer cared about the so-called noble face, and with his physical advantage, he quickly escaped through the gap in the sentry tower and disappeared into the sky full of snow. And when the greatest enemy disappeared, Roddy and Zoro, who were originally working together, immediately looked at each other. Although there was a blood feud that could not be resolved, the two were both filled with fear of each other. In Roddy's eyes, Zoro, who had the blessing of Witchcraft, was far more powerful than him, and Roddy now had no divine spells to support him or scrolls to help him, and he could not even lift the battle axe in his hand. If he directly rushed up to Zoro and fought with his life on the line, he would probably be instantly killed, and Zoro knew very well that because he was limping, he had completely lost his mobility. Should he rush up and kill Roddy now? Zoro had such a thought, but then he discovered with great pain that the effect of ancestral souls would disappear in a few seconds. Once this spell ended, the consequence would be that all his attributes would be reduced by 80%. Under such circumstances, even if Roddy took a rock, he could still smash himself to death. After a moment of consideration, Zoro immediately ordered his remaining troops, "Retreat! Get out of here!" As soon as the ground stopped shaking, he suddenly jumped on the nearest warg, and with his strong body and superb horsemanship, he rushed out of the gap in the wall not far away. He held Roddy's cranium crusher in his hand, and Roddy held his battle axe. The two old enemies had unknowingly exchanged weapons, and at this time the distance between the two was getting bigger and bigger. Chapter 291. When evening came, the gloomy sky quickly darkened. The snowflakes gradually stopped falling, and the newly accumulated snow on the wilderness revealed a dull dark blue. The wind was biting cold, but it was not as cold as Baron Balaam's expression. The undead were different from the other races. They would not risk their lives for certain goals like the orcs and humans. To them, life was always the most important thing. Being alive was the foundation of everything. Thus, Balaam would not feel too ashamed for running away. However, that deep humiliation would forever be imprinted in his mind. I must destroy Sora's outpost. I must. The undead were vengeful. Whether it was Ansadin, Magda, or Balaam, they would not let go of any enemy who made them suffer. What Balaam did not know was that the young man he had just fought was actually Roddy, whom he thought was dead. Balaam escaped from the sentry post in a disheveled manner and quickly found the troops that he had left behind. As Wizard Simon had led his troops to attack, there were not many people in his troop. All in all, there were only 3 necromancers and 70 undead soldiers. When Balaam regrouped with his team, the first thing he wanted to do was to return to Sora's outpost for revenge. However, the anti-magic effect that was still present made him extremely fearful. After the rune shattered, his strength had dropped significantly, and if the Death Knight did not have the support of magic, it was as if his wings were broken, and he was no threat at all. Damn it! What the hell is going on? He tried to mobilize the frost elements, but there was not much progress. Just when he was hesitating whether he should wait until dawn to take revenge, his subordinate sent him a question that he could not avoid. Bloody Crow had detected a group of people outside Elson and witnessed them shattering the barrier and entering the city with his own eyes. This news immediately made Balaam feel like he was sitting on pins and needles. The reason he could walk out of Tasman was not as simple as taking down an outpost, because the real mission that His Majesty Augustine valued the most was the mysterious Elson and the charged crystal within it. It didn't matter if he messed up the sentry post. If Elson's treasure was taken by someone else first, Balaam would probably have to bring his head back to Augustine. So he no longer hesitated about whether to take revenge or not. He immediately ordered his troops to prepare and march toward Elson at full speed under the cover of the night. "Wait for me to come back. I'll tear you to pieces." Holding his broken left arm, Balaam swore fiercely. On the other side, Zorro, who had entered a state of absolute weakness due to the ancestral soul, was lying powerlessly in front of the bonfire. There were originally more than 90 of them, but only 20 of them managed to escape from Sora Outpost alive, including himself. And after this tragic battle, the supplies they had snatched back in panic were not enough to feed the remaining orc women and children for the entire winter. In other words, Sauron's entire plan had completely failed, and he had even lost almost all of his capital. The flames danced in the wind and snow, as if they would be extinguished at any moment. Sauron's eyes were half open, and the pain caused by his injury made his arm tremble slightly. Although he had been treated by magic and witchcraft, the shock to his internal organs could not be alleviated. At this time, even if he coughed, it would affect the nerves of his whole body, and it would be extremely painful. But Sauron almost ignored the pain in his body, because he knew that he had lost all opportunities. The team of 20 could no longer pose any threat to Sora Outpost, and it was already an extravagant hope for them to survive this winter. Is this the end? No one would be willing to let all their plans and efforts go to waste. But the world was often cruel, and most people's lives would not always be smooth sailing. No matter how much planning and preparation they had, it could be completely ruined because of an accident. Sauron's silence made the atmosphere in the camp seem to freeze. The injured soldiers ate the food they had looted, but they felt that the delicious bread had become tasteless. They were not fools, and everyone knew what this situation meant. But this atmosphere was quickly broken by an inexplicable tremor. Sauron frowned, gritted his teeth, and sat up. He ordered his men to investigate. The orcs had poor night vision, but the snow-white ground allowed them to quickly figure out what had happened. The scouting orcs ran back to the temporary camp excitedly and shouted, "It's a herd of antelopes! More than 100 of them!" The earthquake caused the animals to behave abnormally. The herd of antelopes, which used to hide in the mountains, was startled and rushed out of Gondola Mountain. After running for a few hours, they accidentally approached Sauron's location. Such news made the King of Thousand Axes take a deep breath. All the strength seemed to have returned to him. He reached out and grabbed the cranium crusher that originally belonged to Roddy. His eyes slightly narrowed, and in a deep voice he said, "Everyone, get ready to hunt. We will definitely survive this winter." When it was almost midnight, the anti-magic effect finally disappeared, and the oppressive atmosphere gradually dissipated. The bonfire was burning brightly. After the earthquake destroyed 2 watchtowers, the interior of Sora Outpost was a little messy. But at this time, the gap in the wall had been repaired. The patrol team vigilantly watched the wall, watching for any approaching enemies. Sodeler, Hanks, and the others were seriously injured. After receiving treatment, they fell asleep. The snow fell quietly. Roddy sat in the commander's office that originally belonged to Hanks, his eyes slightly lost in thought as he looked at the self-awareness of the defense system in front of him. When the barrier decays to the point of collapse, it will produce the effect of elemental vacuum. If it is forcibly opened, it will produce a relatively large vibration. If not, it means that it dissipated naturally. The High Elves' language in the book floated in Rhodey's mind. Every word and sentence told Rhodey a fact. Elson's barrier had been forcibly opened. This meant that Roddy's biggest target, Elson City, had been one step ahead of him. No matter how hard he pretended to be calm, Roddy's heart was still a little flustered because of this news. Among the 3 forces today, Roddy finally became the biggest winner with his own strategy and luck. His team achieved the goal of retaking the outpost, at the cost of 23 dead squires and 68 injured. Because of Akasha and the others, the injured soldiers who had previously troubled the army had all recovered with the help of potions and divine spells. If Hanks and the remaining knights were included, the fighting power of this team was not actually weakened. But Roddy was not at ease at this time. He did not stop to send scouts to confirm Balaam's position, only hoping that he would not immediately launch a revenge attack. Waiting was anxiously. Roddy's eyes were sunken, and his face was pale from exhaustion and injuries. He looked like a legendary vampire. The wooden door was pushed open. When Roddy looked up and saw that it was Akasha, he said in a hoarse voice, "You still haven't rested. Hurry up and go to sleep. I asked Hanks to separate a room for you and Natha. I'm not sleepy yet. I came to sit with you for a while." For the first time, Akasha's tone revealed a sense of unquestionable authority. As soon as the words left her mouth, even she was a little surprised why she used such a tone to speak to Roddy. She handed the cup of hot water in her hand to Roddy. The cold night made people's hands and feet cold. Roddy was indeed a little cold. Looking at the steaming cup in front of him, he could not help but feel a little touched. He took it with both hands and said, "Thank you." Akasha did not smile, because she could see that Roddy was haggard and tired, and also felt the great pressure hidden in his heart. For some reason, looking at Roddy like this made her heart ache. She wanted to open her mouth to ask, but felt that she could not help at all. Akasha bit her lips, and finally sat directly next to Roddy. There were no other chairs in the room, and Roddy sat on a slightly wider wooden chair. When Akasha sat next to him, she naturally had to be close to his body. This made Roddy suddenly recover from his conjecture about Elson, and instinctively moved to the side. At this time, the distance between the two was about 5 centimeters. Roddy, today you saved me again. That guy is very strong. I was afraid that you would have an accident. Roddy rubbed his eyebrows. Originally, he felt that it was not appropriate to be so close to Akasha, but his physical exhaustion made him give up the idea of standing up and walking to the side. He thought for a moment and continued, "Sooner or later, you will meet him again, so, when the time comes, use those scrolls if you can. Don't hesitate." He began to worry about Balaam's strength again. Even if Balaam used rune cracking once, it was still not something he could compete with. If Balaam came again, could he really kill him with scrolls? He was really anxious, although Rhodey was always absent-minded. Akasha, who was sitting beside him, did not seem to mind. Akasha rarely took the initiative to do anything in her life. However, after she was injured in the afternoon, when she saw how worried Rhodey was about her, she finally felt relieved. She then felt an inexplicable joy that she had never felt before. He turned to look at Roddy and asked in a low voice, "Your wound doesn't need to be treated? That's it. There should be no problem tomorrow." Roddy's status bar had a debuff of healing effect reduced by 15% because of the frequent divine healing. There were still some side effects from the kick in the chest, but he did not intend to rely on divine healing anymore. After saying this, the two seemed to fall into some kind of awkward situation. Roddy did not know what to say, and Akasha was considering whether she should take the initiative to hold Roddy's hand, because she wanted to use this method to slightly relax Roddy's mood. Of course, how much selfishness was naturally unknown to others, but for Akasha, who had never held anyone's hand before, this kind of initiative was already considered to be breaking through the limit. Her fingers moved slightly. Akasha took a slight breath and asked, "Roddy, are you worried about something else?" As she said this, her hand gently moved over, but before she could touch Roddy, a figure appeared in front of the unclosed door in front of them. The scouts said that the undead have retreated, and are moving towards the southwest overnight. Nada appeared silently, but before she could finish her words, her eyes were fixed on Akasha's hand as if they were attracted by a magnet. The wood elf frowned, and such a slight emotional fluctuation was immediately caught by Akasha. Logically speaking, being seen so close to Roddy, she would certainly feel uncontrollable shame, but at this time, facing Natha, Akasha's fingers strangely tightened, tightly holding on to Roddy's hand. Chapter 292. Roddy was startled by Akasha's actions. He didn't understand what was going on. He raised his eyebrows and looked at her, asking, "What's wrong?" His hands were cold from sitting for a long time. Akasha's white and soft palm made Roddy feel very comfortable. But before Akasha could answer, Natha quickly turned her head and said in a low voice, "I'm going to rest first." She hurriedly walked out and disappeared into the corridor outside. Roddy didn't notice that Natha's hand, which was hidden under the cloak, was actually holding a blanket. This wood elf knew that the temperature in Roddy's room wasn't high, so after investigating, she thought about it and brought a blanket with her. But after seeing Akasha, she finally chose to give up. Natha's defeat made Akasha feel a little proud, but she also knew that she couldn't be too presumptuous. She tried to maintain her composure and pretended to be indifferent. "You get sick easily like this. I'll go pour you a cup of hot tea." After saying that, she stood up and very naturally let go of Roddy's big hand, as if she was just holding the chair. "No need, I'm going to rest in a while. You should go back and sleep early." Roddy was a little confused at this time. He felt that something was not right, but the news that Natha brought was obviously more shocking. But soon he remembered something and called out to Akasha, who was about to leave, "Wait." Akasha turned her head and saw that Roddy had actually taken a strange-looking staff from the weapon rack at the side. "See if you can use this thing. Maybe it will be helpful to you." This staff that originally belonged to the necromancer Simon was considered a trophy. In Roddy's eyes, its attributes were actually not bad. Menta's summon two-handed staff excellent exclusive. Necromancer level 5129 to 149 damage plus 69 intelligence plus 23 spirit equip. When using summoning spells, the effect increases by 1 level. Use. Casts Bone Shield spell level 2, 3/4. The reason why he said maybe was because it was written exclusive to necromancers. According to the original rules of the game, priests could only get attribute bonuses but couldn't use the skills on it. But just as Akasha took the staff, the elemental fluctuations that flashed in that instant made Roddy frown. His gaze became dignified and he said, "Do you feel anything special?" "I don't know because I've never used a staff before. Most of the mages in this era used small wands. Wands were extremely expensive and powerful equipment. Akasha was born at the bottom of the Viper Cross and never had much money on her, so she had never used such high-end goods. However, the feeling of having a connection with the staff made her feel a little strange. I can feel its power fusing with me. It seems like it can release skills? If you like it, take it back and study it. Rest early." Roddy originally wanted to ask something, but in the end, he didn't ask it. Akasha wanted to say thank you, but she felt that it would make their relationship seem distant. Finally, she held the staff with both hands and bowed her head. "I like it very much." As for whether she liked the staff or something else, she naturally didn't say it out loud. She just left the office reluctantly, not forgetting to remind Roddy to keep warm. But Roddy didn't have the mood to appreciate this little priest's concern. He looked at the words, Angel of Death, above Akasha's head, and the words, Exclusive Necromancer, flashed in his mind. He muttered to himself, "What the hell is this title?" To be able to let a priest directly use the necromancer profession's item, this strange thing was definitely related to the title. But even if Roddy and Akasha became close friends and even had a follower relationship, he still couldn't find out the specific effect of such a title. Things that he couldn't figure out could only be left for later. Roddy sat back in his chair, tried to clear his mind, and then thought about the information brought by Natha. Opening the map bar, he quickly confirmed that Belorm was leading the team in the direction of Elson. Thinking of Ansidon's research, Roddy immediately confirmed that Belorm was going for the charged gemstone. Perhaps Augustine also understood the importance of this thing, and had sent a team to study it. From this point of view, Belorm must be extremely important to Elson. If that's the case, the sentry is safe. The threat of the undead and the orcs was temporarily gone, and Roddy finally felt the pressure on his body was a lot less. However, the Judgment of the Bone Throne mission was still not completed. Obviously, this battle was not stopping Belorm at all. But after this battle, they had gained a lot of experience points, and the strength of the entire team had also increased by a level. In addition to the summoning of the door diagram, the battle axe Endless Wrath, that originally belonged to Zorro, was the loot that troubled Roddy the most. He would never have thought that the legendary master known as the King of 10,000 Axes in history would actually exchange weapons with him at this time. And this battle axe called Blood Drinker was obviously the legendary axe that was talked about by countless players on the forum. It was said to be legendary because this axe had accompanied Zorro through many battles, and had been reforged 4 or 5 times due to damage and upgrades. It had completely witnessed the entire process of the orcs' invasion of the kingdom, and now, it was quietly placed in front of Roddy. Blood Drinker Epic Two-Handed Axe. Advanced Level. 2528 to 724 damage equip. There is a certain chance to trigger Bloodlust special effect. Attack speed increased by 45%, movement speed increased by 25%. Equip. There is a certain chance to trigger self-healing special effect, restore 5% HP. Equip. There is a certain chance to trigger Wild Force Special Effect, increase strength by 120 points, lasts for 5 seconds. An ancient battle axe blessed by generations of witch doctors. Iron ore was scarce in the Orc Kingdom, and the forging technology was not good. There were very few pure metal weapons, and this old battle axe was obviously one of the best. Compared to the Cranium Crusher, it did not come with a high strength attribute, but it had a very high damage limit, and a series of witchcraft. Roddy had no idea what the certain chance was, but he was sure that in a chaotic battle, the effect of this axe was definitely stronger than the Cranium Crusher. It was just that it was too heavy and Roddy was not used to it, but he really did not know whether it was a blessing or a curse to exchange weapons with the other party. What if the Orc Kingdom had a king of 10,000 hammers in the future? Roddy shook his head, feeling that such an idea was a little ridiculous. In the end, he stopped thinking about it, washed up hastily, and went straight to bed. 2nd of January. The shocking battle that broke out at Sora Outpost was still unknown. In such a season, it was often difficult for messengers to deliver letters to the border in time, and the success rate of sending letters by pigeon was also very low. So, the Dukes of Angmar still did not know about Sora Outpost, and he was in a very passive situation. He sent people to Mount Kars to investigate, and indeed found a buried campsite, which indirectly proved that Roddy's army was completely wiped out was true. But the other nobles of Iferta were not interested in the old Duke. They raised their wine glasses, laughed, and celebrated the arrival of the new year, and continued to laugh at Roddy, who died before he could achieve anything. They were all beneficiaries of the decline of the Duke, so such a thing was naturally worth celebrating. He was trying everything he could to ask the Holy Cathedral for the help of the Holy Knights to defend the border, but because of the long journey, he had not received a reply from the Holy Cathedral, even after a few letters had been sent. It was also on this day that Sally, who had been bewildered for many days, finally received a handwritten letter from her father. Even though Viceroy Rubens had personally confirmed the news, Sally still had a glimmer of hope in her heart. How could a smart person like Roddy die because of an avalanche? Thinking back to the experience of traveling through the Forest of Silence with him, Sally felt that his knowledge was much richer than that of the veteran mages and mages. With such a mind, no matter how careless he was, he would not die in a natural disaster like the avalanche. That could be avoided by humans, however. The letter from the Dukes of Angmar told her the truth. The avalanche was thought to have been created, and Roddy's death was completely due to the enemy's framing. The clear handwriting on the paper could not be changed. Sally's hand holding the paper trembled slightly, and the pain in her heart was unprecedentedly intense. When all hope disappeared, the bone-deep despair was almost unbearable. She could not imagine how she would be able to study here peacefully for the next 1.5 years. She could survive because of Roddy. She could come to the Holy Cathedral because of Roddy. And almost everything she had now was related to Roddy. His figure was deeply engraved in her heart. No matter whether that guy was suffering from some curse of eternal beauty, or whether he was an emotional idiot, she decided to go back and confess to him completely. 1.5 years, only 1.5 years. But she did not expect that the silent farewell outside the city gates of Hollier would become an eternal farewell. Her mind was muddled. She, who had never been late in the past, was not in the mood to listen to today's lecture on magic. She sat there silently, sobbing silently. Sally had been independent since she was young, and her heart was even more proud than ordinary people. But at this moment the disappointment made her feel so helpless for the first time. She just sat in front of the window and watched the sun rise and set. Only when the surroundings returned to darkness did she finally stand up slowly. The Rose Cross sect had not been peaceful recently. Although it was winter, their old enemy, the Viper Cross, had been active recently. Therefore, the cardinals were recently discussing whether or not to carry out a certain degree of attack on the heretics in the southern part of the kingdom. And yesterday the decision was finally passed. Governor Rubens had accepted the task and had already begun to prepare candidates for the operation in spring. It was late at night. At this moment, Governor Rubens was writing mobilization letters to the bishops of the various dioceses. He did not expect that Sally would look for him at this time. It was impossible for an ordinary priest to meet the governor directly, but Sally was Rubens's favorite student, so she had a small privilege. But when Rubens saw Sally, he quickly noticed that the condition of the daughter of Duke was very bad. "I've already replied to Benjamin's letter. Regarding that matter, the Church has already made a decision. No matter who the enemy is, I will not let them go." Rubens had a very good impression of Rhody. It could even be said that he admired Rhody. After all, Rubens was able to rise to a higher position in the Church because of Rhody's attacks on the undead. Therefore, it was reasonable for him to avenge Rhody's death. But Sally did not even change her expression. She only bowed and thanked him. Her hoarse voice made Rubens's heart ache. "Go back and rest early. If you are not feeling well, I will inform the people in the lecture hall." He thought that Sally was here to ask for leave, but then he realized that he had completely guessed her intentions wrong. "Lord Governor, I am here to make a request. I know it may be a little too much, but I hope you can agree." Chapter 293. Aaron Calendar, Year 589, 2nd of January. It had been a day since the earthquake. The anti-magic effect caused by the time-stop barrier had finally dissipated around Elson. The team from the High Elf Noble Council of San Verano, also known as the Holy Assembly, had finally made their preparations and stepped into their final destination, the south gate of Elson City. After the simple training along the way, these descendants of the High Elves had developed some tacit understanding with each other. However, what happened before the time-stop barrier broke had completely separated Camilla from the team. Everyone knew that Camilla would probably not have much room for advancement in the Holy Assembly in the future. However, as long as she was not judged to be an apostate, she still had to follow the team. Camilla knew what the Holy Assembly was capable of. Although she was not afraid of Captain Speck, she was afraid that the Holy Assembly would take certain measures against her daughter, Naifi. Therefore, she had no choice but to compromise and continue to follow behind the team. Speck directly ignored Camilla. He did not even threaten her. Clearly, he was more concerned about the mission in front of him than a helpless woman. The inner gate is open. The active defense system is not activated. No elemental fluctuations. No signs of life. At this time, the Arcanists were carefully investigating. Their feedback was also very satisfactory to Speck. The ruins in front of them was the city with the strongest defense of the High Elves. However, it was obvious that after being stopped by the barrier for nearly 800 years, it had become a complete dead city. The city was octagonal in shape, surrounded by stone walls. It covered a large area. The surface of the walls was more than 15 feet high, and the surface was smooth. It was not at all rough and bumpy like the human fortresses. It was obvious that they had been cut with magic. At this time, it was a silent demonstration of the exquisite craftsmanship of the High Elves 800 years ago. A typical fortress in the kingdom of Karen would have a cylindrical tower. However, all the towers in Elson were triangular in shape. The shape was sharp and gave off a somber feeling. Because of the enchantment, everything that Speck could see had not the slightest trace of erosion. The ground was as clean as new, there was even fresh moss at the base of the city wall. After walking through the city gate, there were marks left by carriage ruts on the wide street, and she could smell the fragrance of flowers when she breathed. Speck and the others slowly walked into the city, but there was not a single person in sight. There wasn't even the chirping of insects or the chirping of birds. Only monotonous footsteps could be heard as they walked. The group advanced cautiously. In the end, Camilla was not assigned to scout ahead. In fact, everyone knew that her existence had already become an unstable factor in the group. First, she was ostracized, then isolated. In the end, she might even be exiled and abandoned. According to the original words on the theory of making energized crystals, we need to find the energy refill here and look for the later volumes of this book to find the key to making crystals. Captain Speck assigned the task. Although he had been rude to Camilla along the way, he did have a meticulous mind that was hard to come by. Everyone in the group, keep a distance of 10 feet from the front and back. Do not leave the group without permission. Do not touch anything at will. When he finished speaking, he looked at the back of the group and frowned slightly. In the end, he did not pay attention to Camilla, who was holding her forehead with a pained expression. All right, let's move on. He turned and walked forward, not forgetting to add, if anyone falls behind, I will not stop. The Holy Assembly can't afford to waste any time. Camilla clenched her teeth and sighed after hearing this. She naturally knew that the other party was talking to her, but at this time, she was indeed not feeling well. Fatigue and sleepiness were secondary. The inexplicable dizziness and headache after entering the city was the main cause of her unsightly expression. What the hell is going on? Camilla felt that everything in the city made her very uncomfortable. She even had tinnitus from time to time. She held her forehead and tried to keep up with the group. She tried to look at the inner city wall, trying to distract herself, but because of the headache, she had to pull her gaze back. However, just as her vision swept across an alley beside her, she suddenly felt something flash past. What is that? She stopped and looked at it. After carefully recalling for a moment, she finally felt that it should be an illusion caused by the light. Then, she held her forehead and continued to walk forward. Time passed. 3 hours after the Holy Assembly entered Elson City, the Frost Baron Belorm's team also arrived at the city gate. But unlike Speck and the others, he was now facing the west gate of Elson City. After losing Sora's sentry, Belorm's temper became worse and worse. In order to vent his anger, he even personally chopped a few animals that did not know what to do. And when he saw the empty city gate and the exquisite city wall, his face that had been tense for 2 days finally revealed a gratified smile. I'm afraid that the harvest this time is more than what your majesty imagined. Looking at the streets that were cleaner and tidier than the Tasman Kingdom, the rows of beautifully decorated buildings, and the tall magic tower standing in the middle of the city in the distance, Belorm only felt that there was a mountain of gold and silver placed before him. Lord Baron Bloodcrow has just detected that another group of people has entered this place ahead of time. The untimely words of his necromancer interrupted Belorm's fantasy, and the corner of his mouth that had just curled up instantly froze. How many people? Where did they come from? They entered the city from the south gate and are now advancing toward the inner city. It seems that they are looking for something. There are a total of 15 of them, and what? Belorm raised his head. The fact that the treasure had been taken by someone else made his face very gloomy. According to the analysis of the Bloodcrow, they seem to be mages, and their levels are not low. In order not to be discovered, the Bloodcrows in the sky could not record the images clearly. However, the Arcanists of the Saint Assembly could clearly see the movements of the Arcanists. The Necromancers were also spellcasters, so they could immediately tell that the Arcanists were not weak. This news immediately ruined Belorm's mood that had just improved. In fact, he really wanted to say, if you don't care, just follow me and hack them to death. But 15 mages and 15 knights were two completely different concepts, because a battle involving multiple mages could never be judged with common sense. Belorm pondered for a long time, and finally suppressed the negative emotions that arose from the consecutive setbacks in his heart. He said in a low voice, "Continue to let the blood crows keep an eye on them. We will continue to search for charged crystals." Elson City was huge, and it would take almost half a day to walk from the west gate to the east gate. Belorm decided not to find trouble with these guys for the time being. He needed to confirm the purpose of these mages here. If they were also here for charged crystals, Belorm did not mind fighting them at all costs. This was because this was a mission personally issued by King Augustine, and he must complete it. The necromancers obeyed the order, and the team immediately began to advance into the inner city. The undead carefully searched everything around them with weapons in hand. Because they did not understand the High Elves' language, they carefully searched all the buildings, and the result made Belorm feel that this city was even more strange. There was not a single person here, but the furnishings in the houses seemed as if the owners had just left a few days ago. The wine glasses in the taverns were even filled with bright red wine, the straw for the horses was still fresh, and some of the iron pots in the kitchens even had food that had either gone bad or not. Shrink the formation and prepare for battle. The huge, empty city made Belorm feel a little uneasy. No matter how he looked at it, this city should have at least 10,000 or even tens of thousands of residents. But where did they all go? What is going on? Faced with such a strange situation without any mental preparation, Belorm felt a chill down his spine that he hadn't felt in a long time. Almost at the same time, Roddy walked out from the north gate of Sora Outpost and led the troops behind him towards Elson. There were still 100 days left before the judgment of the Bone Throne. For Roddy, this was still more than enough time. For this trip to Elson, Roddy only brought 30 light cavalrymen and 60 squires. With this arrangement, the remaining soldiers could assist Hanks in ensuring the safety of Sora Outpost, while he could maximize his mobility and offensive capabilities. After all, after so many battles and sacrifices, Roddy did not want to bring his soldiers to an unknown city. After all, there was always more than one way to prevent the destruction of the kingdom. He was not without other options. But thinking about the changes that the charged crystals could bring to this world, Roddy had to stop the undead no matter what. The changes brought about by technology would always be something that a simple stone city could not compare to. Roddy had a deep understanding of this. So, as he led the troops forward, he emphasized the purpose and plan of this trip to Sodalar and the others. Before the barrier enveloped the city, there was a large-scale evacuation, but the exact number of people left is unknown. So, even if we meet some high elves, it would not be surprising. Hearing Roddy's calm words, Natha asked a rare question. "Roddy, do you think we will meet real, living, pure-blooded high elves?" "That is possible, but I am not sure." Roddy paused and continued, "In that book, there are some arguments about the time-stop barrier. Khadgar believes that the so-called time-stop is just an illusion caused by the slow flow of time." Seeing Natha's expression, Roddy knew that she might not understand what he was saying. So, he changed his approach and said, "In short, it is very likely that 800 years have passed outside the barrier, but only a day, a year, or even 10 years have passed inside. This is something that Khadgar cannot control." Natha nodded and did not say anything. Sodalar asked, "Then what do we do after we go in? Can we control this city with less than 100 people?" "I brought the cavalry to deal with the undead. As for controlling this city, we need another way." Roddy patted the book in his hand. "If you compare a city to a living person, how would you control him? Shackles and shackles?" Akasha asked curiously. Chapter 294. After nightfall, the team of the Holy Assembly and Elson stopped in front of the inner city wall. Captain Speck obviously had a certain understanding of the city. He knew that Elson was not as simple as it looked, so for the whole day, He led the team to carry out a carpet search in the area outside the inner city. After confirming that there were no ambushes or traps around, they found an open space outside the inner city gate to camp, ready to enter the inner city tomorrow. His cautiousness during missions had saved Speck's life many times. Therefore, after checking the surrounding buildings, he still had to confirm the emergency route of retreat before he could be at ease. After dinner, he briefly explained the upcoming mission to the Arcanists sitting in front of the bonfire. The situation in the outer city is roughly confirmed. There are no elemental fluctuations, no traps, but the inner city should be a different matter. The information given to me by the Holy Assembly said that most of Elson's core secrets are in the inner city, especially the magic tower in the center of the inner city. So from tomorrow on, everyone must follow the team closely. If there is an accident, retreat is the first choice. Do not take risks, understand? The Arcanists were not hot-blooded soldiers, so their silence at this time was a response. The sentry at night needs to be rotated by 3 people. There must be no mistakes. However, before Speck could finish her words, everyone's attention was suddenly diverted by a sudden sound next to them. There's someone over there. Camilla stood at the back of all the team members, but at this time, she raised her hand and pointed to a building not far away from her and whispered in alarm. Even if they knew that she and Speck had a conflict, the people of the Holy Assembly also understood that this was not a place for jokes. Everyone immediately became alert and prepared for battle. Then, under Speck's leadership, they surrounded the house from front to back. But after searching for a long time, as if they were facing a formidable enemy, they found that there was not even a shadow in the house, let alone a human figure. However, Camilla could not confirm that she had actually seen any human figures. Some of them flashed past the windows, and some even stopped at the end of an alley to glance at them. The team members were skeptical and continued their search. However, after Speck and the others had been pointed here and there by Camilla 4 times, they still did not see any of the living people that Camilla had mentioned. On the contrary, they didn't even see a dead rat. Therefore, when Camilla said for the 5th time that she saw a figure in the distance, Captain Speck said with a gloomy expression, "If you see something, go find it yourself." There was nothing wrong with saying such a thing. After all, apart from Camilla, no one else had seen the so-called figure. As such, the credibility of Camilla's words dropped drastically. At this moment, no one was willing to believe her words. But who could know that Camilla had really seen these figures? Camilla swallowed her words of rebuttal. Obviously, she also understood that the situation in front of her was strange. There were 15 people in the team. Why was she the only one who could see these shadows? The closer she got to the inner city, the clearer she could see the wandering figures in the surrounding buildings. Not only that, but her headache also worsened. However, the repeated searches made her feel a deep sense of powerlessness. It was late at night. The team finally rested after Speck stopped tormenting them. However, Camilla kept her eyes open and looked around. Because of the murmurs in her head, she couldn't sleep. She was no longer willing to tell her companions that she could hear all kinds of sounds, because at this point, if she were to tell others what she saw or heard, she was afraid that she would be treated as a complete lunatic. All of this was probably her own hallucination. Camilla covered her cheeks in pain. She wanted to sleep, but she couldn't sleep for the whole night. The pain made her feel that every day was like a year. When the sun rose again, Camilla hastily ate some food. Just as she was about to keep up with the team, she saw Speck stride over and said calmly, "Because the inner city is more dangerous, after a simple discussion, we have decided to let you stay here to be responsible for the safety of the camp and the rear." Camilla clenched her fist. "If anyone wants to enter the inner city, you have to send us a signal and stop them. If our progress is smooth, we will return here after leaving the inner city." "All right, that's all that needs to be said. Let's move on. Camilla, remember your duty." After that, Speck led the team into the inner city without looking back. Camilla didn't even have the chance to refute. She clenched her fists, but she didn't know what she should do. Looking at the team that was gradually getting further away, she gritted her teeth. But after a few minutes, she let out a long sigh and sat down weakly in the simple and crude camp. This is also good. The feeling of being abandoned as a lunatic made Camilla extremely angry and helpless. Because in front of the Holy Assembly, she would always be the weak one who couldn't fight back. Camilla had long recognized the cruelty of this world. She didn't have any choice in her life. Rubbing her eyebrows, Camilla tried to relieve the increasingly severe headache. She thought for a moment, then reached into her clothes pocket and fumbled for a small bow. Now that things had come to this, perhaps only Naifei's bow could slightly alleviate her terrible mood. If I can't go back, at least the Holy Assembly won't think that I'm a traitor. Time passed by slowly. Camilla sat in the cold wind haggardly, feeling that her body temperature was also dissipating with the wind. After the Holy Assembly left, there was no more movement. She thought that everything would be quiet, but she did not expect that after just an hour, there was a sudden sound of hooves coming from the street not far away from her. Boom! When the explosion sounded, Roddy, who was walking on the street of Elson, instantly tightened his grip on the short bow in his hand. Prepare for battle. The fully armed knights on both sides immediately pulled out their swords and stood on guard. The already mature squires raised their shields and formed a formation. Under Sodeler's leadership, they solemnly prepared to face the enemy. Be careful of the possible enemies around. Akasha, pay attention to protection. Roddy shouted a few words behind him, then jumped off the horse, an explosive arrow already on the short bow, and stepped up to the top floor of the high elven-style residential building. For Roddy, the most likely enemy in this city was Balaam's army of the undead. So he let the scouts carefully explore the road ahead, in order to prevent the enemy from ambushing them. At this time, the sudden explosion clearly showed that there had been contact between the troops in front. Natha, come with me to have a look. Sodeler, lead the troops forward and follow. After saying that, Roddy sped up and flew forward. Natha's figure was a little slower, but she quickly caught up with Roddy's pace. The two flew past countless buildings and instantly disappeared from everyone's sight. The scouts' scouting range was not as far as that of the planes. Roddy's requirement was 300 meters. That was why it only took Roddy 30 seconds to arrive at the scene. When he and Nada arrived, they saw a gray-robed sorcerer attacking the scout with a fireball. An elementalist? Roddy had expected to see a necromancer, but he did not expect to see an elementalist here. She was clearly not an undead. Although she was wearing a gray robe with a hood, her figure was obviously that of a slender woman. This situation puzzled Roddy, but since she had attacked his men, there was no room for negotiation. He turned to Natha and made a few hand gestures. Roddy took a step forward and leaped towards a nearby building, almost immediately melting into the shadows. Natha picked up her longbow and looked for an opportunity. Unlike the short bow she used before, the longbow Roddy gave her was extremely stable. Although it was not as convenient as the short bow, the accuracy was a notch higher. At the same time, it felt much softer than before. The expensive, explosive arrow was now the standard for Roddy and Natha. The specially weighted spiral arrow could maintain a high degree of accuracy even at a distance of 100 meters. Following Roddy's instructions, Natha found a high platform with 3 obstacles. She immediately drew her longbow and shot an arrow. The speed of a longbow was slower than a short bow, but for an unguarded target, this kind of silent arrow was more difficult to guard against. But the reaction of the gray-robed magician was clearly beyond Natha's imagination. The magician did not use a shield or dodge awkwardly. Instead, he directly jumped to the side and dodged the arrow with incredible agility. Bang! The explosive arrow exploded on the ground, blasting a hole in the stone floor. The magician's figure quickly rushed towards the nearby house. The magician's speed was extremely fast. Every step he took seemed to have a boost. In just 3 steps, he had already rushed into the house. But in the next second, Roddy's explosive arrow shot through the gap of the window and directly into the house. Boom! The arrow did not hit the magician's body, but it successfully used the shockwave of the explosion to force her out. But before Roddy, who was standing on the roof, could fire a second arrow, an inexplicable force came from behind and pushed him directly off the roof. F***ck, Roddy cursed inwardly. He did not understand what skill the magician had used. A distance of 5 meters was not a problem for Roddy, but when he landed, he found that the magician was actually rushing towards him. A magician actually dared to fight in close combat? Roddy was surprised, but he did not have the slightest bit of fear. He picked up the blood drinker and pounced towards the magician. Camilla bit her lip. Her messy long hair covered her eyes because of the shockwave of the explosion. There was a tear in the front of her clothes, and some blood was seeping out. More than half of the cloak behind her was blown to pieces. The ringing in her ears caused by the explosive arrow made her unable to hear anything around her in many years. This was the first time she had been forced into such a situation by a human. As an arcanist, such a result was enough to be laughed at. Chapter 295. Although arcanists and elementalists were both sorcerers in terms of professions, they were completely different when it came to real battles. The arcane spells that Camilla mastered were completely different from the ones that humans currently knew. The high elf descendants of the Holy Union might not have a high level, but their combat prowess far exceeded that of other mages of the same level. Just like the shield that Camilla released when she was facing the Blooddringer's attack, Roddy, a veteran player, had never seen it before. Crack! The damage of the axe hitting the shield at close range was much higher than that of an arrow. The moment the shield appeared, a large patch of cracks instantly appeared. However, this unknown shield did not completely shatter. Instead, it shifted the direction of the axe's blade, causing it to slash upwards. The Blooddringer's weight was too heavy, and its attack speed was too slow. There was no way for it to change its attack. After Camilla lowered her head to dodge the axe, she raised her hand and pointed at Roddy's chest. Bang! The sound of air being compressed rang out. Roddy dodged with all his might, barely dodging the arrow-like air current by a hair's breadth. What kind of person is this? Camilla was not an undead, and the skill she used was something he had never seen before. This strange situation made Roddy completely unable to see through the opponent's strength. All sorts of curiosity made him look at her. However, Camilla's hair was messy due to the intense battle. Her chestnut-colored hair covered her cheek. Roddy could only see her sharp and bright eyes, but could not see her face at all. But why does it feel so familiar? These questions only appeared in his heart for a moment before disappearing in an instant. As Camilla raised her palm again, Roddy's mind was left with an unprecedented focus. The axe swung for the second time. The whistling sound of the wind and the shattering of the shield sounded together. However, the spell that Camilla had cast was not for attack. Instead, she used the air current that exploded from her palm as a counterforce, allowing her to flip backwards and avoid the Blooddringer's horizontal slash. Roddy's pupils shrank. He had never thought that a sorcerer could be so flexible. His opponent's actions were like a ranger wearing a robe. However, Roddy's PvP experience far exceeded that of a superhuman's. It had almost become an instinct for him to counter every move that came his way and fight her with speed. As soon as Camilla landed on the ground, he had already leaped to the front of her. Blooddrinker was extremely powerful in a chaotic battle, but after 2 consecutive attacks, Roddy realized that it was difficult for him to land a hit on his opponent. At that moment, he simply let go and pulled out a dagger from the side of his boots as he leaped. He took a step forward and thrust his dagger forward. The instantaneous increase in attack speed clearly surprised Camilla, but she did not panic. Faced with the dagger stabbing towards her chest, she abruptly dodged to the side. The sharp blade did not hit her, but it silently cut open the fastenings of her cloak. Seeing this, Roddy immediately swung his fist forward. This time, Camilla did not dodge, but used a standard blocking posture to block the punch. Instantly, Roddy's hands reached forward at the same time, temporarily losing the ability to attack. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Camilla leaned back and abruptly slammed her head towards Roddy. This was not a simple clash of brute force. Roddy could clearly see a diamond-shaped spike formed from ice crystals appearing on top of his opponent's head. If this move were to land, it was possible that the head of an ordinary person would be smashed into pieces. Roddy really did not expect a female sorcerer to be so brazen in close combat to this extent. However, despite being amazed, he was not the slightest bit afraid. He immediately activated his turtle shell shield and charged towards Camilla. And so, Natha, who was running over from afar, witnessed the scene of Roddy and the mages, head-to-head colliding. Bang! The sound of ice crystals shattering rang out at the same time. No matter how valiant Camilla was, she was ultimately not a strength type that was suited for close combat. As for Roddy, he was tall and strong. This kind of collision gave him an advantage. Furthermore, he had the protection of Nokia's magic. With this one strike, he directly knocked Camilla back a few steps, causing her to fall to the ground due to dizziness. Camilla's cloak's buckle had been cut off by the dagger earlier. When she fell to the ground, the cloak also slid down. Due to the inertia of retreating, when Camilla slightly raised her head and looked forward in a daze, the long hair that originally covered her face also fluttered backwards. At the same time, Roddy had already pounced forward with the dagger in his hand, thrusting the dagger towards Camilla's chest. This strike was a sure kill. Roddy's cold expression was abnormally resolute. He did not care if his opponent was male or female, human or demon. Since it was a battle, he must give it his all, leaving no room for retreat. However, this firm belief that had persisted for many years instantly collapsed when his gaze landed on Camilla's face. At this moment, Camilla could only feel the world spinning around her. She wanted to dodge, but she could not get up. Elemental mobilization required the coordination of her mental strength. However, in a chaotic situation, she could not even cast a single spell. Looking at the dagger that was thrusting towards her, she finally closed her eyes as though she had accepted her fate. Naife must live on properly. At the moment when she knew that she was going to die, she could only think of her daughter. However, Camilla felt a huge force crashing into her body, causing her to fall to the ground. Bang! Roddy's dagger could change direction after it was thrust out, but his body could not stop at all. Thus, Camilla could not escape the fate of being knocked down by him. Roddy hurriedly got up and found himself riding on her soft waist. His hand that was stretched out to support himself on the ground coincidentally held onto Camilla's wrist. Camilla opened her eyes in a daze and saw Roddy's excited and strange expression. However, in this situation, the only thing she could think of was that he wanted to do some dirty things. Go to hell. Her beautiful face, which was 90% similar to Naife's, was instantly flushed with shame and anger. She raised her right hand and was about to cast a spell at Roddy. However, how could Roddy let her kill him? He hurriedly pressed her hand down. Thus, at this moment, Roddy rode on Camilla's body and pressed her hands tightly. His body leaned forward, almost touching her face. Natha, who had already run 10 meters away, was completely dumbfounded by this scene. It was not like the wood elves did not know how to give birth. Of course, she knew when Roddy would use this position. Instantly, the back of her ears turned red, and a lot of messy thoughts popped up in her mind. The heavens have mercy on him. Roddy just did not want to die. What are you doing? Let go of me. Camilla's voice was very magnetic. Even if she shouted out in desperation, it inexplicably revealed the charm of a mature woman. However, Roddy really wanted to let go, but he did not dare to. The mage in front of him was almost carved from the same mold as Naife, except for the hair color. The woman that he had been dreaming of suddenly appeared in front of him, and he even thought that he was hallucinating. However, Camilla's frantic struggle made him recover from the shock. Seeing that she would rather die than surrender, Roddy hurriedly said in a loud voice, "Calm down. Calm down. Naife. Let me explain." This sentence was like a spell that instantly stopped Camilla's struggle. Natha's longbow was already nocked with an explosive arrow. The bowstring was pulled, and the tip of the arrow was aimed at Camilla's chest. Roddy was startled by her expression as if she was facing a formidable enemy. He hurriedly raised his head and said, "Don't move. Don't move. We're on the same side. It's all a misunderstanding." She had never seen Roddy in such a moment, because his voice even changed because of excitement. Then, she saw Roddy directly let go of Camilla's hand. This scared the hell out of Natha. She did not know Camilla, and she did not know the story between Roddy and Naife in his previous life. So, she did not put down the longbow in her hand, but kept aiming at Camilla, who was in a daze. Why did this guy in front of her call out Naife's name? As Naife's mother, she believed that no one knew her daughter better than she did. Even though everyone in Mogra village said that her daughter looked like her, no matter how much Naife resembled her, it was impossible for anyone to mistake her for a 12-year-old girl. And where did this powerful young man in front of her come from? The dizziness caused by the desperate fight gradually faded, and Camilla's expression became serious. She slowly stood up and looked at the excited Roddy in front of her. She slowly asked, "Who are you? How do you know my daughter?" These words were like a thunder, directly striking Roddy half to death. What? Roddy's mouth opened so wide that he could almost stuff Natha's longbow into his mouth. His eyes widened, and the joy in his heart instantly turned into ice water. Then, his heart that was filled with excitement instantly turned cold. Daughter? Daughter? This is Naife's mother? Roddy only felt like his head was hit by a cranium crusher, and the expression on his face was like that of a seriously ill schizophrenic. The floodgates of memories were opened, and Roddy recalled every word that Naife said as if he was reciting his family treasures. "Do you have parents? Why are you asking this? I don't like this question." "Then I won't ask. In fact, it doesn't matter if I tell you, I have never seen my father. My mother left me a long time ago, and I have been living here alone for all these years. But my mother told me to wait for her to come back, so I will wait here." When Naife said this, her eyes were looking at the bright stars in the night sky, but Roddy clearly saw some tears in the corner of her eyes that he had never seen before. Naife's mother left her a long time ago, and she... Wait. Until now, Roddy suddenly realized a problem that he had always ignored before. Naife at this time should be only 12 years old. Damn it, something big happened. "You." Roddy looked at Camilla, who looked almost the same as Naife in front of him. Only then did he notice that Camilla's temperament was different from the mischievous girl in his memory. That slightly angry expression was clearly showing a dignified expression, and the arcane spell condensed on her fingertip. Don't. I mean no harm." Chapter 296. For Roddy, this was the most embarrassing thing he had ever experienced. Ever since he came to this world, Roddy had actually kept his views from 597 years ago, such as his habits of using skills, his comments on equipment, and so on. Among these, he had also misjudged Naife's age. It was 589 years ago. How come he had never associated this with Naife's age? At this moment, Naife was only 12 years old, or 13. Damn it, 13 years old. If he told others that the girl he liked was not even 14 years old, everyone would probably think that he was a pervert. Before this, Roddy had planned to marry Nephi in Mogra village after defeating Elson. Now, he was very glad that he did not tell anyone about this. Otherwise, he would be labeled as a pedophile for the rest of his life. In this era, there was no such thing as a lolicon. Roddy was sure that if he told his mother-in-law that he wanted to marry her, she would not hesitate to skin Roddy alive. In fact, she did intend to do that. Don't. I know Nephi. I mean no harm. To show his sincerity, Roddy reached out and pressed Natha's longbow down. The wood elf could not understand Roddy's action at all. She looked at him stubbornly, but Roddy scolded her. Put it down! This was the first time he was so fierce to Natha. In the past, he was very serious, but he never talked to Natha like this. Therefore, after being scolded like this, Natha did not resist anymore. She just bit her lips tightly, and her eyes were full of stubbornness and grievance. But Roddy did not have time to explain to her. When he turned around, he saw that her hand was still pointing at him. The atmosphere was stagnant for a moment. Roddy could even see the air around her fingertips being twisted. The senior arcanist slightly squinted her eyes. Although she was at a disadvantage in the previous battle, she was confident that she could blow Roddy away now. However, looking at Roddy, who had his hands raised high and his face full of apology, she hesitated. To be honest, if Roddy had said anything else, she would not have stopped her attack. But the name, Nephi, was the only thing that she could not touch. How do you know Nephi? She did not put down her finger. It seemed that she was ready to attack if Roddy did not answer. But before Roddy could answer, the sound of horse hooves suddenly made Camilla's face darken. The scouts around her did not die after they fell off their horses. Because of their shields and strong physique, 2 of them had already stood up with their swords. They did not come over to help, but pointed out the direction for the troops behind them. So the cavalry appeared on the street where Camilla was standing. Then they cooperated with the infantry and completely surrounded the place. The holy shield appeared on Roddy's body. Akasha was holding the gray magic wand and looking at the front nervously. The soldiers were holding their swords tightly, as if they were going to cut Camilla into pieces at any time. Roddy did not want to force his mother-in-law into a life-and-death struggle. He hurriedly ordered the troops to step back and said, "The Nephi I know lives in Mogra village. She is 12 years old this year. She has red hair. She likes to take Uncle Sam's car to Green City. She likes to count the stars in the sky at night. And she is left-handed, right?" Roddy did not know what Nephi's mother did, but he obviously knew how to gain her trust in the first place. As expected, after he said these 2 sentences, Camilla's determined expression finally relaxed a little. This made Roddy secretly let out a sigh of relief. He was very clear that this mother-in-law in front of him, who he did not even know the name of, definitely had the idea of dying together at that moment. "Where did you meet her?" "When?" "In Green City, about half a year ago. Let me introduce myself. My name is Roddy." Roddy casually made up a lie, then pointed at Sodeler and said, "This is Baron Sodeler. I am the captain of the guards of the Dukes of Angmar. 2 days ago, Sola Outpost was attacked by the undead and orcs. We suspect that the undead have entered this city, so we came here to investigate. Our troops do not have any malicious intentions, and we hope that you can relax a little. As for Nephi's question, I can explain." Roddy almost immediately sorted out his thought. The words came out very quickly and contained a lot of information. It was obvious that he did not tell the truth, but it was obvious that he did not mention the key point. However, under the current situation, Camilla, who was surrounded, actually did not have any choice. "Camilla." After a moment of silence, she slowly put down her arm and said her surname. However, this did not mean that she had given up the mission of the Holy Assembly. She looked up at Roddy and said word by word, "I only have one purpose here." "What purpose?" Roddy knew that this was not good. He had already seen through Camilla's character and knew that she was the type of person who would not listen to anything. If she asked for something excessive, there would be no room for negotiation. I will stop everyone from entering the inner city. Camilla reached out and tucked her slightly messy hair behind her ear. When she said this, there were 3 layers of soldiers surrounding her. This scene reminded Roddy of the words, "revolutionary martyr." What organization is she working for? Why is she so loyal and devoted? Roddy was a little curious, but he could not agree to Camilla's request. If it was not for the fact that she was Nephi's mother, Roddy would not even ask about it. However, at this time, Roddy could only explain in a calm tone, "We are here to seek revenge against the undead, but because we have not completed our investigation of the outer city, we will not enter the inner city for the time being." The word "for the time being" made Camilla clench her fingers slightly. She understood that she was alone and had no right to say such nonsense. Roddy's concession did not mean that he would listen to her obediently. After all, it was the first time they met, and each had a different purpose. Such a contradiction was impossible for the 2 stubborn people to reconcile. "My troops will be stationed here, and I will not restrict your freedom. However, I also hope that Madame Camilla can cooperate with me. I repeat, we have no ill intentions." Roddy still wanted to say something, but the sudden headache made him frown instantly. He clenched his teeth and tried to force an explanation to Camilla, but found that she was also pressing her temples and tightly closing her eyes. The exhaustion from a night of not sleeping, the continuous high-intensity battles, and the sudden onset of a headache immediately caused Camilla, who was already exhausted, to feel dizzy. She staggered and fell forward. At the same time, the Holy Assembly team that had entered the inner city did not notice anything that happened in the outer city. Camilla made a lot of noise during the battle, but all the sounds and vibrations seemed to be filtered by the inner city walls. Everything was silent, and the spacious and gorgeous atmosphere of the city was like a graveyard, making people feel uncomfortable. Camilla is probably crazy. Maybe she's just timid? Captain Speck is just letting her off easy. I don't want to have a lunatic standing behind me. The Arcanists had strong confidence in their own strength, so when they were walking in the inner city, they would occasionally have short conversations with each other, and the content was mostly related to Camilla. However, these people seemed to have a certain prejudice against Camilla. Along the way, no one said anything good about her, and all of them spoke in a disdainful and belittling tone. However, such a situation came to an abrupt end when Captain Speck suddenly made a hand gesture. The team was originally walking on the complicated streets leading to the core of the inner city. The buildings on both sides were still empty, and there was not a single living person in sight. However, at this moment, everyone saw the hunchbacked figure standing in front of the team. "Who are you people?" This was an old elf with slightly purple skin. His pointy ears drooped down, and his face was full of wrinkles. His pupils were blue, and he spoke in the authentic High Elf language with a special accent. Chapter 297. Strictly speaking, the destruction of the High Elves' civilization had occurred 718 years ago. The time-stop enchantment that enveloped Elson City was equivalent to a fragment of the civilization that had been destroyed 718 years ago, completely preserved here. It wasn't that no one had discovered or explored Elson City in the past 700 years, but all the exploration teams that had entered the forest had never returned. Thus, clues about the existence of the High Elves' ruins had become increasingly rare. Even today, very few people on the continent even knew of the existence of Elson City. The time-stop barrier obviously meant that everything in the city was in a state of stillness. In other words, it was absolutely possible to see a living high elf after 700 years. However, it was still very weird. Therefore, the arcanists of the Holy Assembly gathered arcana energy in their hands almost immediately, ready to blast the old elf into pieces at any time. We are adventurers who entered the city. Speck thought for a moment and replied to the old man's question in the High Elves' language. Then she narrowed her eyes and asked softly, "May I ask why the people in this city seem to have disappeared? And why are you here?" His words sounded polite, but the fingers behind his back were already ready to cast a binding arcane spell. His body was also tense, ready to go into battle at any time. Disappeared? No. Lord Khadgar issued an emergency evacuation order, but I'm old. There's not much point in evacuating or not, so I stayed here. The old elf seemed to be in a bad mood. He took a few steps forward and looked at Speck and the others. His brows furrowed, but his tone changed slightly. You're not High Elves? When did humans have the right to come to Elson City? There had been humans 700 years ago, but at that time they obviously had no status on the continent. They were basically regarded as barbarians and were uncivilized in the eyes of the High Elves. Thus, the old elf's words were filled with disdain. However, Speck and the others looked at each other. They had obviously obtained a lot of information. The man did not know what year it was, and the Khadgar he mentioned was the highest level arcanist in Elson City back then. Even the time-stop barrier was cast by him. Judging from the man's manner and tone, he seemed to be a high elf who lived more than 700 years ago. No, we are not humans but high elves. We can explain this. Speck carefully worded her words, but the old elf was not very interested. She waved her hand and said, "Go find someone else. There aren't many people left in the city, and I don't know where Lord Khadgar went. I also don't know if the beastmen have retreated. You should head east as soon as possible. If you go to Wagra City, you still have a chance of being saved." Speck and the others did not chase after him, but they were even more convinced of some information. He doesn't know about the passing of time? Perhaps to him, the beginning and end of the barrier should have happened at the same time. If that's the case, would they still think that it's more than 700 years ago? The orcs were attacking here then? Then they are the residents who didn't manage to escape in time. After a short discussion, the team decided to move forward. As expected, they met another high elf walking on the street. This time, the high elf did not refuse to talk to her. Instead, he politely answered Speck's question. "You're asking about the library? There are 3 in the inner city, but the royal library is over there." A fair-skinned female high elf pointed at the corner of the inner city. She then pointed at the towering mage tower in the center. "As for the energy replenishment device you mentioned, it's in the tower. After the orcs attacked, it has been heavily guarded. The guards only retreated 2 days ago, but there should still be restrictions, so I advise you not to go there." This high elf's attitude was friendlier than the old man's, but she was still worried. "I'm afraid that the orcs will attack again. If you want to leave, you should leave quickly. If you're late, it might be too late." "Then why don't you leave?" "Me? My husband died outside the city, so—" She turned around sadly. Speck hurriedly apologized, but she was clearly not in a good mood. She did not say anything else and walked away quietly. "I think it should be over there, right?" Speck had always felt strange talking to a high elf from hundreds of years ago, but now all the evidence pointed to the possibility of their guess, and the doubts in her heart gradually dissipated. However, the members of the Holy Assembly would not make a decision just because of a few words. They continued walking the streets of the inner city and met 3 or 4 groups of high elves. After asking all kinds of questions, they finally confirmed the authenticity of all the information. The energy replenishment device should be in the central mage tower. But to enter, we need to break through the restrictions, and those books should be found in the royal library. Speck thought for a moment. Looking at the huge inner city, she frowned. "For safety's sake, none of us can move separately. Let's confirm the time." Alright, let's go to the library first. Yes. One by one, the members of the Holy Assembly responded in a low voice. Then, they followed the team. Under the slightly strange gazes of the High Elves, they felt like they did not fit in with the city. When Camilla opened her eyes again, she felt dizzy. Her eyelids were heavy. The exhaustion of the past few days had made her body ache. Now that she was covered by a warm fur blanket, she suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of comfort. She had not laid so comfortably in a long time. She thought of her 12 years in Mogra village. She also thought of her precious daughter who would call for her mother to wake up every morning, Naife, Naife? As if in the blink of an eye, the memories from before she fainted suddenly came back. Camilla remembered her series of encounters. Encountering cavalry, arrows, close combat, and being hit on the head by that guy called Roddy then. Camilla thought of how Roddy had straddled her and held her hands down. That humiliating position made her feel ashamed and angry. Camilla, who was only 29 years old, swore to herself that if there was a chance, she would definitely beat this guy up. Even if he knew Naife. But this feeling only flashed for a moment. She quickly realized that she had fallen into the enemy's hands. Turning her gaze, Camilla found that the face that she wanted to beat up was right in front of her. Lady Camilla, your body is very weak, so I don't suggest you do anything irrational. Roddy sat at the side. Camilla had been unconscious for half an hour. During this time, he had already thought of how to persuade her. So when Camilla woke up, he went straight to the point and said, "This city is very dangerous. I know that since you came here, you must be mentally prepared. But what I want to say is, the danger here is definitely beyond your imagination." As for Roddy's words, Camilla completely treated it as an alarmist. She did not think that any human could know the secret of Elson City. She did not think that such a young man had the qualifications to preach in front of her. Roddy looked like he was only in his 20s. How could a young man at this age be reliable other than talking big and boasting? Thinking of this, Camilla shifted her gaze slightly and saw Akasha, who was wearing a white robe and holding a gray staff. This priest was staring at her with undisguised hostility. This scene made Camilla feel a little funny. In her eyes, although Roddy had defeated her in a battle, he was still an ordinary human. He was on a completely different level from the Holy Assembly. So she felt that Roddy's words were like useless threats from a child. She did not even want to listen to him. "I don't know why you are doing this to me, but I will still say, if you want to enter the inner city, I will definitely stop you." She raised her gaze slightly and looked straight at Roddy. "Although you did not use any torture or imprisonment on me, don't think of getting anything useful out of me." To Camilla's surprise, Roddy just nodded and did not continue to refute. Instead, he reached out and helped her up. He then took out a bowl of hot meat soup and placed it in front of her. "Some things, it is not too late to hear me out." Camilla was a little annoyed by his forceful behavior, but at this time, she was powerless to shake him off. Facing the fragrant meat soup, Camilla also wanted to refuse. However, she had eaten too little food these days, and her body honestly produced an indescribable hunger. After thinking for a while, Camilla finally reached out and took the soup. After all, if Roddy wanted to harm her, he would have died 10,000 times when he just fainted. After drinking some soup, Camilla felt as comfortable as if she was soaking in hot water. Although she still had a lot of bad feelings towards Roddy, his face seemed to be a little more pleasing to the eye. Roddy sat calmly in front of her. He had already freed himself from the nervousness and embarrassment of facing his mother-in-law. Elson City was not a safe place. He did not feel much security here at all. So after quickly forcing himself to calm down, he readjusted his identity. After all, the next step was to negotiate. If he talked as a junior, he would be asking for trouble. He coughed softly and then said in a low voice what he had thought of long ago. "Elson City is one of the greatest cities of the High Elves. under the effect of arcane spells, the defense system here has developed its own consciousness. But for some reason, it was finally sealed in the time-stop barrier by the Arcanist Khadgar. Am I right? Holding the bowl of soup, Camilla's expression changed. There are many secrets in this city, including their architecture, culture, and even civilization. But I think the most worth exploring is perhaps the lost invention of the rechargeable crystal. Am I right? Ignoring Camilla's tightly pursed lips, Roddy calmly stared into her clear blue eyes. He continued, "Let's talk about something more important. This city was not conquered by the Beastmen. What defeated it was its own defense system." Impossible. Chapter 298. Lord Baron, we found some fragments here. About 2 kilometers away from Roddy and Camilla, on the other side of the outer city of Elson City, Balaam reached out his hand and took a few crystal fragments from his subordinate. He squinted his eyes and examined them carefully. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. "Ah, I still found it." According to the notes that King Augustine took from Ansidin, this was the charged crystal that he had been searching for so long. In a little more than a day, Belorm had already led his team to search half of the outer city, and his efforts had paid off. However, just the fragments were far from enough. Belorm needed more rechargeable crystals, and he also needed their production information. In short, he had to take back everything that was useful. The more he gained, the more rewards he would get from King Augustine. Every time Balaam thought about what he might get, the suppressed negative emotions in his heart would be relieved. At this time, he was in a good mood. He raised his hand and put the fragments into his pocket. He then ordered his subordinate necromancers, "Continue to search. After the outer city is searched, then the inner city. Oh right, where is that team of mages?" That team of 15 mages always made Balaam feel like there was a fishbone stuck in his throat. But in the eyes of the nobles, every war or battle had a purpose. If the other party was not interested in the charged crystal, he naturally did not need to waste his troops to fight a battle where there was no objection. "Lord Baron, the detection of the blood crows failed." "What do you mean?" Balaam's smile froze. He frowned and asked, "The blood crows are dead?" "Not dead. After that team entered the inner city, there seemed to be some power that blocked the vision of the blood crows. Since then, the blood crows have not been able to track them. This situation was unexpected. This city was full of strange things. Not only did they not meet anyone along the way, but even the reliable blood crows could not detect them. The good mood brought by finding the charged crystal fragment was gone in the blink of an eye. Balaam found that his luck seemed to be always bad, and he could not help but feel a little annoyed. At this time, another necromancer hurried over. Balaam knew that it was not a good thing at first glance. He asked coldly, "What's wrong?" "There is a team entering Elson from the south gate. It seems to be a team of humans." "Human?" Balaam suddenly turned around, his luxurious cloak fluttering in the wind due to the eruption of his aura. The ice elements rotated tyrannically, almost freezing the bodies of the 2 undead. Who else in the kingdom of Karen would be so bored as to come to such a desolate place? The only possibility was the bastards from Sora Outpost. Belorm was almost immediately able to determine the identity of Rhodey and the others because he had just left Sora Outpost and immediately came here. No one else would be able to catch up to him in such a short time. Preposterous. Balaam was angry at first, but then he felt that it was unreasonable. He had a lot of combat experience and could naturally tell that Sauron was able to exchange blows with him because he had used some kind of secret technique, but the consequences were usually very serious, and it would be difficult to recover in a short period of time. What about these humans? That guy with the chain hammer only knew how to use underhanded tricks and sneak attack. He didn't even have the ability to exchange 3 moves with him. With this kind of strength, they still dared to chase him here to court death? If that's the case, I'll fulfill your wish. When Belorme thought of his tragic experience, he felt like his chest was about to explode. Without another word, he mounted his warhorse, waved his sword, and ordered, "Send blood crows to keep an eye on them. I want to get rid of these scums with my own hands." When Belorme decided to launch a surprise attack, Camilla was shocked by Roddy's shocking words. "I don't know what the force behind you is doing here, but I want to say, if you rashly enter the inner city, you will definitely end up badly." Roddy controlled the rhythm of the conversation unhurriedly. There were the footsteps of patrols outside the tent, and she could also hear Soddler's orders to Rugcat when he was assigning tasks. Words such as "pay attention to the scouting area" and "go to the tower to observe" were clearly heard by Camilla. This invisible atmosphere was actually a little oppressive, constantly reminding Camilla of the fact that she was trapped in the enemy's territory. After saying the word "impossible," Camilla immediately realized that she had made a slip of the tongue, but it was too late to remedy it. At this time, she could only shut her mouth. But in her heart she was completely shocked by the secret that Roddy had mentioned. As a member of the Holy Assembly, Camilla had indeed come into contact with some confidential information, but this information was not as lethal as Roddy's alarmist words. How could Elson be self-destructive? "I know this not by guessing. I know you won't believe me, so I brought the evidence. You know the High Elf language, right?" Roddy reached out and took out a thick book. When the words on the self-consciousness of the defense system entered Camilla's eyes, although she tried to hide her emotions, her long eyelashes still trembled slightly. Roddy did not seem to notice. He lowered his head and began flipping through the book. He pointed at Khadgar's signature on the first page and said softly, "Coincidentally, I also know the High Elf language." An arcanist called Khadgar said that he had deployed all of Elson's defense formations and systems, and that he had personally created Elson's consciousness. He called this consciousness he created Turing. Interesting name, isn't it? Camilla did not speak, but her eyes followed the handwriting that Roddy's fingertips were pointing at. Her heart was in turmoil. How did this book end up in his hands? Roddy flipped through a few pages. The entire defensive layout of Elson City, the cross-sectional diagrams of each core structure, and the incantations to activate the formation flashed past. Here are some sentences that might help you understand why I said that the inner city is dangerous. After Turing's consciousness gradually lost control, I had no choice but to activate the time-stop barrier to prevent it from causing harm to my people. I felt that I could no longer control everything. I had to disintegrate its consciousness. But it was almost invulnerable, thank the heavens. I found a way, but I had to go to the core of the Pasha Magic Tower. However, Turing had already sensed my intentions, and it was resisting. I have already completely abolished the defense system of the outer city. This will delay the evacuation of some of the residents. But to solve all of this, the final key is in the secret chamber of the underground palace. Roddy continued to flip through the book until he was almost at the end of the book. This is the last thing I can do. Once the barrier is activated, my life is only enough to maintain the barrier for 800 years or less. At that time, the power of the crystals in the city will be exhausted, and Turing's power will also be weakened. No matter who it is, you must go to the Pasha Magic Tower to activate the formation. Otherwise, Turing will be destroyed. The scribbled handwriting stopped abruptly. Camilla felt cold sweat all over her body. Roddy closed the book with a snap and handed it directly to Camilla. "I believe you can tell whether this thing is real or fake." Camilla held the huge book in her arms and looked at him with dull eyes. It seemed that she had received too many shocks in a short period of time and was completely stunned. At this point, if she still could not understand the situation at hand, she would really be stupid. The information that the Holy Assembly had was obviously not even 1/10,000th of the book, and until now, Speck and the others obviously did not even know who Turing was. Those old fellows of the Holy Assembly all thought that Turing had been destroyed long ago, but they did not expect the secret from more than 700 years ago to be so complicated. Khadgar blocked this place just to buy time. He did not solve the problem brought by Turing, but left the opportunity to solve the problem for 800 years later. No one knew this fact, so the group of ignorant arcanists now entered the inner city of this city without any intuition. If Turing was still alive, what did it mean? Camilla could not help but shiver. After 12 years of peaceful life, she almost could not bear this kind of pressure, which was like a landslide. If everything was really like what the book said, perhaps the arcanists of the Holy Assembly would undoubtedly become the victims. And herself? If everyone else died and she walked out alive, according to the ruling of the Holy Assembly, it was also equivalent to betrayal. The consequence of betrayal meant that Naife would be erased from the world by the Holy Assembly. Camilla suddenly realized that there seemed to be only one road in front of her. Originally, Roddy was calmly waiting for Camilla's reaction, but the sudden alarm outside the tent made him frown and stand up. The curtain blocking the cold wind was pushed aside by Akasha. Camilla turned around and saw Roddy rushing out of the tent. Then, when he looked up at the sky, his expression changed slightly, and then he raised his short bow whoosh. The arrow flew out and the crisp sound of the explosive arrow echoed in her ears. What followed was a few curses and orders from Roddy in a low voice. Camilla vaguely heard him say words like low altitude, blood crow, and targeted. The curtain of the tent fell, and in the dim light, Camilla opened her eyes wide. Her mind was filled with the information she had just received, and the book in her hand was heavy and worrying. While she was thinking, the curtain of the tent was suddenly lifted, and Roddy walked in with the cold wind. He frowned and said with a gloomy face, "We have been targeted by the undead. We must enter the inner city now." The inner city meant Turing's territory, and it meant absolute danger. "Someone will take you out of here. Go now." Roddy's words were tough and irrefutable. Camilla hated Speck's orders very much, but when she heard him talking to her like this, she did not know why she felt an indescribable warmth in her heart. "I can't go." Camilla shook her head and stood up slowly. "If I escape, Naife will be dealt with by them." Chapter 299. Who are they? Camilla didn't know how to answer Roddy's question. The Holy Assembly would never divulge any information. Camilla had no reason to tell Roddy, a human she had just met, about the organization behind her, but Roddy's outburst of hostility made her secretly startled. Camilla knew very well that the name Naife had touched his bottom line. It made her feel that this young man's concern for Naife was far beyond her imagination. This strange feeling made her feel a little strange. Naife had no father since she was a child. The only person who cared about her was her mother. Why would Roddy treat a child like this when he was not related to her? If there was a chance to go back, she must ask Naife. But Camilla hesitated for a moment when she saw Roddy staring at her. Then she suddenly said, "My team is also looking for the recharging crystal." After saying this, Camilla realized that she had revealed a secret. She panicked. She had been abiding by the rules of the church for many years and knew that this was a leak. If Speck caught her, she would definitely be dragged to trial. But in fact, she didn't think that she had done anything wrong. If everything was like what was written in the book, Speck and the others might unknowingly become the prey or tools of Turing and cause irreversible consequences. Got it. Roddy frowned. He had deduced many things from this simple sentence, but he was not interested in asking more questions. He waved his hand and ordered the team to advance into the inner city immediately. The rudimentary camp was abandoned without hesitation. Many of the supplies were also thrown there. Camilla saw the situation and understood that the other party had made up his mind. She did not make things difficult for Rhodey and consciously followed the team. If she followed them, she might be able to help the Holy Assembly. However, if she stayed there, it would be meaningless. Speed up. Sodeler urged the team to speed up and enter the inner city. The scouts at the back had already reported that they had heard the sound of hooves in the distance. This made Roddy almost certain of the identity of the other party. But entering the inner city now was not just to hide, but to use the most suitable terrain to fight. Although Roddy's team had many people, if they fought with the powerful Belorm in the narrow streets, they would be asking for trouble. Therefore, with Elson's map, Roddy chose to rush into the inner city. He was prepared to use the base of the Pasha Magic Tower as a barrier to defend against the undead. Although the inner city was dangerous, Roddy knew the safest route. So, he rushed to the front of the team, trying to compare the map bar in front of him to advance towards the Pasha Magic Tower as fast as possible. The sound of hooves echoed in the streets of the inner city. Roddy tried hard to control the warhorse. When he looked up, he felt like there were ghosts flashing past the empty buildings. Along the way, Roddy had seen a lot, but Sodeler, Natha, and the others could not see them at all. So, he was too lazy to mention this hallucinatory feeling to others. But when he looked at Camilla, he found that she was also staring at the same corner, lost in thought. Could she see it too? This thought popped up in his mind and then disappeared in a flash. With his environmental sensitivity, Roddy could already hear the unique sound of hooves from the skeletal warhorse behind him. He immediately led the team to speed up again. In a battle of life and death, he had no time to think about Camilla. The seal on the Pasha Magic Tower is very strong. Human, just go and take a look. But I advise you not to do anything else. The calm voice echoed in the deserted street. It was a high elf who spoke. He wore a simple robe and walked casually in front. Speck and the other members of the Holy Assembly followed behind him. Of course. Thank you for leading us here, Mr. Stewart, Speck said politely to the high elf in front of her. Speck said politely to the high elf in front of her. The high elf did not seem to mind. After bringing them to the base of the Pasha Magic Tower, he pointed at the drawbridge-like entrance and said a few words like, "The restriction is dangerous." Then he turned and left without any intention of watching. All high elves seemed to be like this. Speck met no less than 30 or 40 high elves along the way. Some were curious about her, some were disgusted, and some even came up to ask for her identity. However, they didn't have much hostility. They didn't even have their guard up. Clearly, they were very confident in the safety of this city. Speck asked for the reason, and the answer she got was, "Lord Khadgar never makes a mistake. We never worry about any crimes happening." So Speck and the others easily found the complete set of Principles of Making Charged Crystals in the library. They also obtained a lot of charged crystals along the way. The charged crystals that Roddy saw in Wagra's basement were all transparent because they had used up all their energy. However, the ones that really had energy were actually flashing with a faint blue light. At this time, almost all the Arcanists had a small piece in their hands. They were all curiously examining it, amazed by this man-made magic crystal. Speck actually didn't let down her guard at all. She paid attention to the minute movements of each high elf, trying to determine if they were trying to harm her team. But until now, she hadn't found any so-called flaws, and the books she found in the library made her trust these high elves a little more. Rest for a while after crossing that drawbridge. Prepare to break the seal later. The next task was to obtain the most important, energy charging device. This smooth journey put him in a good mood. When he led the team across the narrow drawbridge, he looked to both sides and joked, "This is much more useful than the moat." The base of the Pasha Magic Tower was completely a circular fortress. Towering walls surrounded it, and a deep ravine more than 30 feet deep protected it. The only way in was through the two drawbridges in the north and south. It could be said to be heavily guarded. Obviously, this was the last line of defense in the entire city center, and also the core area of Elson City. According to the level of High Elf civilization 700 years ago, this should be the place where Arcanist Khadgar usually worked or studied arcane magic. Thinking that they would be able to successfully complete the task soon, the Arcanists were full of enthusiasm. One by one, they began to recover their magic power after crossing the drawbridge. Not long after, Spec led the team to the entrance of the Pasha Magic Tower. The black door covered in runes flashed with red light, clearly containing a lot of magic power. Breaking the seal was not easy, but the Holy Assembly naturally would not be unprepared. Spec took out an old scroll, stood in front of the door, and directly released a high-level spell. After the raging waves of elements, the red runes on the door gradually dimmed. Spec cast a few spells, and after confirming that there was no danger in the surroundings, she finally pushed the door open with a gentle breeze. The luxurious front hall, more than 10 feet high, came into view. The runes representing high-level arcane magic formed abstract pictures on the wall. For these arcanists of the post-Kur Elf era, the magic tower in front of them was indescribably sacred to them. Suppressing the excitement in her heart, Spec continued to survey carefully, and slowly led the team into the magic tower. And a few hundred feet away, the high elf who had just led them here stood in the shadows, looking at the open door of the magic tower, the corner of his mouth slowly curling up. A group of ignorant mixed bloods. Chapter 300. The cold wind blew past Roddy's cheeks, making his eyes hurt. After entering the inner city, although nothing seemed to have changed, Roddy could clearly feel that his headache had worsened. Previously, it was just labor pains, but now it had become a constant pain. Only by clenching his teeth and enduring the pain could he maintain his sanity. Perhaps it was just an illusion, but Roddy could clearly feel that his sensitivity to his surroundings had increased. His body's condition had also reached a certain peak. It was as if he had been injected with a stimulant, and his limbs and bones were flowing with an indescribable power. Roddy opened the map bar and followed the most spacious and smooth route to the Pasha Magic Tower. There were only 100 or so people under him, and 1/3 of them were cavalrymen. The infantrymen also maintained their full strength, so the entire team was advancing very quickly. It was estimated that it would take them less than 3 minutes to reach the Pasha Magic Tower. His eyes quickly swept across the retreating buildings around him, and his mind kept thinking about his next step. Although touring was extremely dangerous, after Khadgar had used the barrier to stall for 718 years, the energy that could maintain touring was almost depleted. Touring was definitely still there, but it was no longer a threat. Khadgar was an absolute genius arcanist, and his achievements were far greater than ordinary people could imagine. Because of this, when he realized that touring was showing signs of breaking away from his control, he listed all the ways to destroy and disintegrate touring in this book. After familiarizing himself with the self-awareness of the defense system, Roddy had already memorized a large number of deductions written by Khadgar. It could be said that the current Roddy was currently the person in the world who had the deepest understanding of touring. However, there were always variables in this world. Roddy did not think that the undead would come to this city, nor did he think that Naifei's mother would be involved. From her tone, it seemed that a team had already entered the inner city and was looking for the rechargeable crystal. It did not matter if the other party could find the charging crystal. What Roddy was afraid of was that these people would do something stupid. If the other party had the ability to break the restriction of the Pasha Magic Tower and let the touring sneak in, the consequences would be unimaginable. An existence that could render even the genius arcana master Karthika helpless meant that the people behind Camilla would only be cannon fodder, no matter how talented they were. This was no joking matter. At this time, Roddy had no other choice. Facing Belorm head-on with less than 100 men was almost suicidal, so Roddy had to borrow the fortress walls of the Pasha Magic Tower to do this. The team sped up madly, but the sound of hooves behind them grew louder. Belorm chased after him. From afar, they could feel the chilling killing intent of the Frost Baron. Every time he looked back, the icy blue sword would get closer. As the team neared their destination, Roddy's eyes narrowed, and he finally pulled the reins of his horse beside the long suspension bridge. The ice thorn was raised to the sky. The enemies were still about 400 meters away, but Roddy had already knocked an explosive arrow on the arrow stand. There were no skills, no extra movements. As the cavalry and infantry rushed up the suspension bridge, Roddy fired 3 arrows in a row. To a normal person, they could not even see a human face from 400 meters away. However, Roddy's maximum range of almost 45 degrees did not miss the target. When the first arrow grazed Belorm's shoulder and exploded on the ground, Roddy's 4th arrow was already knocked on the bowstring. The speed of the arrows shocked Camilla, who had already crossed the suspension bridge and was looking back. She turned her gaze to the pursuing undead, and saw that the powerful knight at the front did not even try to dodge the arrows, completely ignoring Roddy's attack. Boom! Boom! The 3rd and 4th arrow exploded on the ice shield on Belorm's chest, causing his expression to become even more ferocious. This Frost Baron was naturally aware of Roddy's intentions, and he knew that he could not let the enemy enter the fortress. If the enemy defended the fortress, he could only return in defeat. The return of the power of frost boosted Belorm's confidence. If this was all Roddy had, he was confident that he could kill his way in before the suspension bridge was raised. Roddy, go! The troops had all entered the suspension bridge, and Sodalar and Akasha, who were in charge of the rear, were shouting his name. But at this time, Roddy did not move. He reached out to pull the last 2 arrows, and hesitated for a moment before aiming at the side. Whoosh, whoosh. 2 arrows flew out one after another, and Roddy did not even look at them. He turned his horse around and stepped onto the suspension bridge. The defensive facilities of this city were similar to those of human cities, and the soldiers that entered the defensive perimeter of the fortress were already prepared to pull up the suspension bridge. The infantry armed with bows and arrows were already in position at the highest point, and Natha had already started to use her longbow to provide support for Roddy. In the next moment, 2 explosive arrows hit a wooden pillar in front of a tavern. The explosive force was just right, and it immediately fell towards the middle of the street. Belorm's expression changed, and just as he was about to crash into the pillar, he raised his sword in a hurry, and the ice element that was originally going to attack Roddy had to explode prematurely, and the wooden pillar was blown away. But this action caused his speed to completely drop. Once again urging his horse to accelerate, Belorm could only watch helplessly as Roddy crossed the suspension bridge. Damn it! Hurry up! He angrily clenched his sword. Roddy, who had already crossed the suspension bridge, did not care about the drawbridge that was slowly being pulled up behind him. He jumped off his horse, picked up the Blood Drinker battle-axe, and walked towards the gate of the Pasha Magic Tower while arranging the defensive arrangements. Natha and Akasha were pulled back by him, and he whispered a few words about the battle plan. But just as he was asking Camilla about her whereabouts, the half-opened gate of the Pasha Magic Tower suddenly stopped him in his tracks. Damn it! The gate, which should have been sealed by the restrictive spell, was flashing with broken runes. This scene made Roddy's heart instantly sink to the bottom of the valley. Camilla, who was standing there in a daze, had already understood who did all this. Although she was able to keep her composure, her face now revealed an unconcealable uneasiness. It was obvious that the Holy Assembly had destroyed the restrictive spell, and had already ruined Roddy's plan. Seeing this situation, Roddy knew that there was no need to say anything more. He stepped forward and prepared to rush inside. The defensive spell around him had not changed, which meant that the Turing had not recovered its strength, and he still had a chance, but just as he took a few steps, a huge explosion sounded behind him. Kaboom! Roddy turned around and saw that the side of the half-raised suspension bridge was hit by a huge ice ball, and the soldiers responsible for pulling the winch were all sent flying. Balaam, who had jumped off the skeletal warhorse, sprinted a few steps, leaped up, and firmly grabbed the bottom of the suspension bridge's hinges. Balaam's powerful strength allowed him to climb up the suspension bridge almost effortlessly. He then suddenly jumped, and landed directly in front of Roddy. The first stage boss of Judgment of the Bone Throne had come to Roddy alone. This time, who else can block the sword for you? With Balaam's strength, unless the scouts attacked on horseback, they would not even be able to break through his defense. So, Balaam did not care how the soldiers next to him attacked him. He just gripped his frosty blue sword tightly and rushed towards Roddy with large strides. Just one day later, he had found a chance for revenge. The excited Balaam could almost see the scene of Roddy being killed by his own hands. And at this moment, for Roddy, it was as if he was in a hopeless situation. In the Pasha magic tower ahead of them, Turing with terrifying strength is very likely to recover the power of his real body. Balaam was chasing after him like a hungry wolf, and he could not escape at all, even though Roddy had an army of 100 men, a cavalry of 40, 3 healers, and a group of elites like Sodeler. All these people were not even an obstacle in front of the angry boss Frost Baron. Holy light flashed, and 3 divine spells fell on Balaam, but he did not even blink. Explosive arrows exploded on his body, but there was still no effect. On the other hand, Natha was directly blasted down from the high ground by Balaam's group icicle spell. Sodeler held his sword and shield, gritted his teeth and prepared to fight again, but when the frost arrow was pointed at him, he found that his feet were frozen to the ground, and he could not even attack. Balaam's face showed a crazed and proud smile, and he took extremely oppressive steps towards Roddy. "You are the first human that can hurt me, so I will not let you die so easily. Accept my judgment." Chapter 301. Since he had accepted the Judgment of the Bone Throne quest, Roddy knew that he would have to face the boss one day. But he had never thought that he would have to face the boss without any preparation. When Balaam's longsword came slashing at him, it was as if the entire world was being torn apart. The feeling of being unable to dodge when facing a high-level force made Roddy's body almost stiffen. But with his battle instincts, he still used leap at the last moment and narrowly dodged the sword. Boom! The blade slashed through the air. Although it did not touch the ground, the icy aura that came out from the impact caused a crack to appear on the ground. Stones flew in all directions and hit Roddy's body, leaving several wounds on him. "Keep dodging," Balaam taunted Roddy as he quickly caught up with him, not giving him any time to breathe. Bam bam bam, sounds of impact rang out. In the blink of an eye, his long sword, knee strikes, and elbow strikes had already forced Roddy back. The undead noble swordsmanship was generally much stronger than that of other races. Their endless lifespan gave them almost unlimited time to study their own technique. In this aspect, Roddy was not a match at all. His swordsmanship was not good, and his attributes could not keep up. At this moment, when faced with Balaam's storm-like attacks, the only thing Roddy could do was retreat, retreat, and retreat. Balaam's ferocity made everyone wary. Akasha and the others worked hard to cast Holy Shield and various buffs for Roddy. Things like Holy Bind were constantly thrown at Balaam, but because of the huge difference in level, they were all resisted, and almost all of them were ineffective. It was not that the other soldiers did not want to help, but they could not even get close. This was because every time Balaam swung his sword, the sword chi that shot out could even leave deep marks on the hard stone walls. Pa! Roddy had nowhere to retreat, and his back slammed into the wall of the Pasha magic tower. In a moment of desperation, he had no choice but to raise his battle axe to block. In the next second, Belorm's sword came crashing down with the weight of a mountain. The biting cold air blew against Roddy's face, and he let out a muffled groan, but he used all his strength to block his opponent's attack. The wall behind Roddy instantly turned frosty white, and the temperature of the blood drinker in his hand plummeted as it was invaded by the power of frost. But in that instant Roddy frowned slightly. He suddenly realized that his body possessed greater strength and reflexes than before under the intense headache. "Ha, keep blocking." Belorm did not care about Roddy's resistance. With a second swing, Roddy almost knelt on the ground, and a third swing followed. It seemed that he had no intention of killing Roddy, and was only using this method to humiliate him. But the expected scene of Roddy kneeling on the ground did not happen. In a desperate situation, he suddenly turned around and swung his battle axe at Belorm. SSSSS. When he switched from holding the axe with two hands to swinging it with one hand, the skin that adhered to the handle due to the cold was completely torn off, but Roddy did not care about the pain at all. His eyes were fixed on Belorm, and he made his first counterattack in this desperate situation. Bang! Belorm, who was too close, could only block. But as the axe clashed with the sword, Roddy felt a burning warmth spread through his body. The bloodlust buff had been activated. Roddy changed his rhythm and swung his axe upwards for the second time. Belorm had wanted to take it head-on, but because of the shadow left behind by Zoro, he decided to dodge. So, Roddy seized the opportunity to reverse the rhythm and kicked Belorm, ready to cooperate with the third blow to force Belorm back. But when his foot landed on the Frost Baron, Belorm sneered. With a loud bang, his body almost did not move, and he was frozen in place. Then, he charged forward and slammed the hilt of his sword into Roddy's chest. Boom! The holy shield was directly shattered. Roddy could not withstand the force and took 3 steps back. His face was pale as he leaned against the wall of the Pasha magic tower. Although he was in peak condition, against an opponent like Belorm, there was no miracle at all. Camilla, who had witnessed the whole process of the battle between Roddy and Belorm, had no obligation to help Roddy as a member of the Holy Assembly. But she knew very well that Roddy was here to kill Elson's terrible consciousness, Turing. If he died, not only would the Holy Assembly be wiped out, even she would not be spared. The enemy in front of her was an undead. Would he ignore her after killing Roddy? The enemy inside was Turing. If he regained his strength, would he let her go? Camilla did not even need to think about it and immediately made her choice. When Belorm's sword was about to pierce Roddy's chest, a huge wave of air suddenly blew him away. The tip of the sword brushed past Roddy's leather armor and pierced into the wall. Clang! A hole was made in the wall. Who? Belorm looked up and instantly locked his eyes on Camilla. He raised his hand and cast a group icicle spell. Without looking, he continued to swing his sword at Roddy. But after a series of crackling sounds, a larger icicle directly hit Belorm's wrist, causing his sword to deviate from its course. The Arcanist Camilla's ability was far beyond that of an elementalist of the same level. The spells she mastered were almost all spells in the eyes of others. After the icicle was Flame Blast, followed by Arcane Blast. Belorm did not expect the seemingly fragile woman beside him to be so strong. He hurriedly swung his sword to cast a shield. Although he blocked the impact, Roddy, who had just recovered from the impact, struck his left arm with an axe. Bang! The strength buff of Blood Drinker was triggered. Roddy did not expect the axe's special effect to have such a high probability of triggering. Because he had the title of Devout, all the buffs were increased by 30% when they took effect. Thus, his current combat strength had increased by a level. After being struck by Roddy, Belorm's body swayed. He was stunned at first, then with a roar, he swung his sword and released Frost Nova. Dodge! Roddy knew that he had to dodge the moment his opponent raised his hand. He shouted at Camilla to remind her. It was an instinctive reaction after many years of fighting. When there was a teammate, one must always shout out a warning. Camilla did not think of this, but when she heard Roddy's words, she immediately spread her hands and released Air Blast after Light Feather. She used the recoil to leap backwards. Frost Nova was suddenly cast, but it did not freeze the two at all. Belorm did not care and continued to attack, but Camilla's skills surprised him. Arcanist had many more skills than Elementalist. Not only did she have Icicle and Fireball, but when Control Arcana appeared, Belorm, who was attacking Roddy in a frenzy, felt as if all his joints were filled with lead. He turned to attack Camilla, but found that she had already dodged far away. Roddy, on the other hand, was still standing with a strong will. Although he was injured a few times, he did not fall because of the healing and the maintenance of the shield. This persistence made Belorm feel pressured. He realized that this seemingly weak human was not as weak as he thought. At the same time, the 5 cursing scrolls that Akasha had released were beginning to take effect. She did not dare to release the Death Coil scroll in her hands because she was hindered by the fight between Roddy and Belorm. However, she kept a close eye on it, looking for the right time to release it. There was a subtle balance in the battle, but this balance was a humiliation to Belorm. But to be able to charge into the enemy's formation alone, Belorm naturally had enough confidence. He swung his longsword and slashed away the flame blast that was flying towards him. Amidst the flames, he reached out and pulled out a scroll hidden under his breastplate. As he tore it open, he raised his longsword and released Rune Cracking. The second rune on the longsword suddenly shattered. Abundant Energy and Rune Cracking were Belorm's 2 trump cards. Once they were used, his strength would increase by several levels for 10 minutes. Roddy cursed. According to the game's terminology, Belorm, this epic boss, had just left the first stage. In the second stage, his strength would increase by 50%, and he would not be able to continue fighting. If this went on, the only thing that awaited him was death. Rune Cracking and Abundant Energy were skills that strengthened magic, which meant that it was very likely that he would use a storm of ice spells to blast himself into pieces. But magic? Roddy's gaze turned to the open door of the Pasha Magic Tower, but his mind was filled with the magic circles that Khadgar mentioned inside the magic tower. In a split second, Roddy immediately made a decision. He gripped his battle axe, gritted his teeth, and leaped into the air. When Belorm turned to look at him, he activated Sprint and ran straight into the tower. Coward! Belorm chased without hesitation, completely ignoring Camilla's arcane magic. At this moment, his aura was strong, and with every step he took, the dense aura emitted a frightening chill. Sodeler and the others watched as Roddy and Belorm entered the tower. For a moment, they didn't know whether they should chase after them or not. Camilla, on the other hand, didn't care about this. She directly used Light Feather to chase after them. Akasha held her staff and ran over. The injured Natha also got up and prepared to enter, but Sodeler immediately ordered the soldiers to stop the undead. However, just as he turned around, he discovered that one of the drawbridges that was half raised had been broken by Belorm's ice ball. At this moment, it could no longer hold up and suddenly fell back. The long drawbridge crashed down with a clang, opening up a path for the undead to charge in. Damn it! Sodeler's expression changed abruptly. He immediately shouted, "Block the drawbridge! We can't let them get in!" The necromancers in the distance immediately sent troops to attack. Sodeler turned to Akasha and shouted, "Roddy knows this place better than anyone else. He must have a way. We must stop the undead, or all our efforts will be in vain." Akasha, who had already rushed to the door, heard this and immediately stopped in her tracks. However, she didn't give up on the idea of helping Roddy. In the next second, the door of the magic tower that was originally opened inwards was slammed shut by a violent impact. The surface of the door was instantly covered in frost, which proved that the inside had been hit by Belorm's frost spell. Akasha reached out to push it, only to find that the entire door was completely frozen, and her palm was almost frozen to the door. Withstand the impact. Raise your shields. The undead spell flashed with green light as the soldiers desperately rushed towards the gap in the drawbridge. Akasha turned back to look at the tightly shut door, pursed her lips, and turned around. However, she knew that there was no chance for her to enter now. Chapter 302. Thud, thud, thud. Dense and messy footsteps echoed in the quiet and narrow corridor. Under the dim light, Speck looked up. The complex and wonderful arcane runes were like the Milky Way in the night sky, making her feel an indescribable sense of intoxication and awe. To arcanists, everything in the Pasha Magic Tower was like a priceless treasure, full of temptation. As descendants of the High Elves, the members of the Holy Assembly believed that arcane magic was the most powerful force in the world. In the Holy Assembly's own words, they controlled the power of God. And the end of the arcanist's path was what people called God. Indeed, low-level arcanists like Speck were far from being God, but this didn't stop them from yearning for this realm. Now, looking at the dazzling relics of the High Elves in the Pasha Magic Tower, although they didn't say anything, their hearts were all stirred up. Our mission is to find the energy replenisher. After ensuring that our primary goal is accomplished, we can study the remaining books here. Speck's order made her subordinates instantly perk up. Obviously, studying the books often meant that they could secretly fill their own pocket. The interior of the Pasha Magic Tower was spacious, but the structure was extremely complicated. Standing in the center of the tower and looking up, the only thing that could be seen was the countless overlapping stairs and corridors that were nearly 100 meters high. The irregular structure of the building puzzled Captain Speck, but in order to find the energy filler, they had no choice but to start searching from the first floor. But before long, they were blocked by a thin figure. The High Elf looked at them with a confused look. The simple robe he wore showed that he was an arcanist's apprentice, the lowest level of the High Elf magician system. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" He didn't show much hostility towards Speck and the others, but he was more on guard. However, the team of the Holy Assembly naturally wasn't here for sightseeing. Speck stepped forward and said bluntly, "We want to take a look at the energy refill." The High Elf frowned and said warily, "I don't know how you came in, but I can't let you see the energy replenisher. Please leave immediately." "In that case, this thing is indeed here." Speck narrowed her eyes and sneered. She raised her hand and pointed. The arcanists behind her instantly released a large mass of light, firmly restraining the apprentice in place. "Then, are you willing to lead the way for us now?" Speck's sneering face sent a shiver down the apprentice's spine. He wanted to yell and resist, but he was tortured by the arcane spells of the Holy Assembly until he screamed in agony. Within a few minutes, he was completely subdued. Dejectedly, he led the apprentices to a corridor that led underground. The Holy Assembly had never been a charity organization. This could be seen from the fact that they were willing to sacrifice Camilla. Using arcane spells to torture and interrogate the High Elves was also not a problem for Speck. After walking underground for a few minutes, the group arrived in front of a secret room. Speck hesitated for a moment. Finally, she used the scroll of the Holy Assembly to open the sealed door. She then pushed the High Elf and stepped into the secret room at the bottom of the Pasha Magic Tower. All the members of the Holy Assembly were attracted by the arcane runes they had never seen before in the secret room. They did not notice the flash of excitement and agitation in the arcanist's eyes. "The energy replenisher is here?" In the circular room, a metal device was placed in the center of the room. Spec looked left and right but could not confirm that it was what they were looking for. The Holy Assembly only knew of the existence of the energy replenisher, but never had an accurate description of it. So now, the captain thought for a moment and reached out to take an energy replenisher from the hands of an arcanist. The crystal shone with a faint blue luster. It clearly contained some energy. Charge it for us to see. Prove that this is the energy replenisher. Spec ordered the High Elf, but the High Elf was not willing to cooperate. But under the spur of a few arcanists, he finally limped towards the center of the room. The arcanists of the Holy Assembly were on guard for any accidents. But because they were standing at the door, they could not see the increasingly excited smile on the young arcanist's face. The energy replenisher was placed in the groove of the strange device. A faint blue light suddenly bloomed and then collapsed towards the crystal. Looks like it's right. After feeling the magical aura that gushed out like a tsunami, Spec's tensed nerves finally relaxed. To her, the mission of the Holy Assembly had been completely completed. But just as this thought appeared in his mind, the elements in front of him that seemed to be spreading out like a geyser made him frown. Logically speaking, this energy should be charging into the inside of the crystal, but the current situation was like elemental diffusion? What's going on? He shouted. But then he saw the High Elf standing in front of him slowly open his arms, as if a dry land was receiving the once-in-a-few-years rain. Damn it! Stop him! Although Spec did not understand what was going on, his instinctive sense of danger made him immediately decide to act. As soon as he gave the order, the arcanists around him immediately threw more than 10 offensive spells at the center of the room. The explosion in the enclosed space was far more powerful than in the open space. The explosion was deafening, and the whole room shook for a moment. When the smoke and dust settled, the arcanist apprentice who was originally standing in the same place had become a pile of minced meat. Spec let out a sigh of relief. But then he realized that the turbulent flow of elements around him showed no signs of stopping. All the attacks were ineffective in front of that strange device. No, an ominous premonition arose in his heart. His eyes stared at the corpses all over the ground, but he felt that the other party could not have died so easily. As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, Spec immediately heard footsteps coming from behind him. The arcanists of the Holy Assembly all turned around, and saw that hidden doors had suddenly opened in the corridor behind them. One by one, High Elf arcanists wearing various types of robes slowly walked out. They looked different and had different levels, but all of their expressions were shockingly similar. Their gazes were all focused on Spec. The energy replenishment device that you want, there are 27 of them in this city. But here, there is not even one. More than 20 arcanists were like puppets being collectively controlled, saying the same thing at the same time. Their completely different voices mixed together, but all of them were filled with arrogance and mockery. However, I still have to thank you for opening these seals left behind by Khadgar. Spec and the others' expressions changed drastically. They all realized at the same time that they seemed to have fallen into a huge trap the moment they entered this city. It really wasn't easy to lure you all here. But in order to recover my power, what does it matter if I am humiliated a few times by you all? As the elemental light intensified, the High Elf arcanists suddenly raised their hands in unison. Before Spec could even react, the violent elemental energy blasted onto her body. Spec was sent flying without any suspense. Bang! His body directly smashed a hole in the wall, and the terrifying power instantly shattered all the bones in Spec's body. He did not even have time to say half a word before he stopped breathing. The remaining members of the Holy Assembly were dumbfounded. They raised their hands and prepared to fight back, but then they realized that more and more High Elf arcanists were surging out from behind the hidden stone doors on both sides of the corridor. All the High Elves' expressions were abnormally stiff, but their eyes shone with a fiery light. They slowly opened their mouths, and the countless echoes of their words became the Arcanist's worst nightmares. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.